YouTube 14, 15, 16, Twitch 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Everyone should be on. All right. Nice little treat audio test with some video. Get the levels ironed out. All right.
All right, what's up, everyone? And
What's up?
I'm trying to move this stuff.
Move it.
And yeah, they'll do an awesome job editing this intro to make it way more fancy than this. But I'm here with my good man, Billy Carson,
Yup.
who I've known Billy personally for some years now.
Yeah.
Solid friend, great character, businessman.
Oh, okay.
He's been on Elevating Beyond last time, sharing your whole story behind the story.
Okay.
And what you hugely specialize in as well, you just came back from Egypt, is like the
What's he know
emerald
about that?
tablets. You've been studying those since what, you were like 6 or something? I think?
No, not the Emerald
What?
Tablets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Emerald Tablets I've been studying for the last probably 10 years.
Okay.
Oh.
But since I was 6, I was studying aerospace
Oh,
technology.
listen to
which then led
him.
me into understanding more about
Me
advanced
too.
technologies, and then finding the
It's my
link between
field.
advanced technology and ancient civilizations, and going on
Me
a,
too.
literally a 25-year, or sorry, 27-year now, goodness, trek around the world. Been around the world now over 18 times. Last year, spent
Dude.
9 months in hotels.
I remember.
As you know, you're my witness. Leaving this big old mansion behind and not going home at all. And
Travel grind.
traveling nonstop to these ancient sites to get the information hands-on.
Okay. And that was weird. I just heard a little chant. Wes, you there?
Frozen.
Oh. Be too easy if it worked perfect, right?
All right. So let me think
What
about
is he
that.
calling in on? What is that app?
This is through
Stream Deck?
I have to ask Carl.
Oh.
It's through. It actually works great usually,
No,
unless there's
it's
something
a
going
great
on
app.
with the
No, I
Wi-Fi.
think it's pretty cool. I'm just trying to figure. I think it's on his end of his connection.
I
Yeah,
could look
I'm just trying
around
to
for
figure
a
out what is
tire.
this thing you're using, this portal.
it's I want to actually press. It's I think it's all through Ecamm.
Ecamm. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so they have their own link. Then
Nice.
you can set this up for different guests. You can
Yeah.
make. When Carl was here through like
I
Eric
could look
Thomas,
around
we're
a
just
tire real
doing the
quick.
show,
I
waiting for him to
still
call
understand
back.
that
Yeah.
tire now.
Yeah, he helped get some of these free
Dude,
things
on this
going,
map,
but you can get way
tire
more
could be
things if
anywhere.
you've got someone that.
Yeah.
I'm just like, how do I do
Tire could be
it?
right here.
Yeah,
to
no,
where-
I think it's a pretty cool platform.
Let me exit, try to jump back in. Okay, cool. So we'll figure this out in some editing and
Got
stuff,
two
or maybe
different
we'll
ones. I
just
thought I
leave
had the
this in.
same
But
one.
as Wesley's getting ready to jump on, Wesley Huff is so with Billy, like you can watch the previous show, and I've had the honor of being on his podcast. So like-minded in so many ways, and I've been talking about this for a while. I'm like, it'd be interesting to have you on and discuss. I don't love overly getting obsessed with the word religion, so I would say more of where some of the beliefs differ. If I was to be connected to a religion, it would be closest to Christianity and the Bible. Although the Old Testament, I have still, it's the New Testament and Jesus's teachings. I have my whole life story where that changed me and transformed me belief wise as a person. And okay, so he's in the green room. And let's see, we got Wes on.
Hello.
Wes, we got you back on. So
Gotcha.
I'll introduce Wes too, but yeah, what I was just saying real quick, Billy, too, is I also a shared belief I think too with you with God is I also believe I don't believe I know God is within you too. It's just, and I don't believe that it's like you have to do 20 circles in the sand and like do a ritual to that was through like my connection with Jesus where I know throughout my life that's been my when things are tough, it's like the strength
should
of
let
God
them
is
talk.
literally within me.
Right.
As so like where we do agree on where like a lot of the heresies and stuff through over religious practices would be like, no, you have to come through the head of this church to be blah blah blah, you know.
Right.
And personally, and we're about to get Wes on, so we can have two really smart people in this talking about it. But I'm just
Yeah.
breaking it down to my level of my
Perfect.
understanding.
So bring him on.
That's been what really drew me in is kind of when Jesus came and flipped all that on its head and was like, no, we're not. What was it like the Pharisees? Like what were the high? He's like, we're not having to go through all the rules. He's like, they're actually worse than this thief right here, and really looked at what was in people's hearts, you know.
Right.
And I think that's a beautiful thing. I know it has been for my life. But I'm about. So Wes, now that we got you on,
Yeah, thanks for the
Wesley
introduction.
Huff, historian,
Moderator.
linguist, biblical scholar, PhD, and athlete wannabe. Like how you threw that in the bio right there. And Wesley, my man, I think it would be great to. I know you guys were both recently in Egypt. There's tons that I'm interested in that. How all these things show up in Egypt is baffling to me.
Fine.
But just going right to it, I had here, Billy, you talk about how Jesus was never crucified,
Wow.
which is interesting because my wife, who's a Muslim, they believe that as well. Their beliefs,
Wife's a Muslim.
from what I understand from her, are they don't think that
Did you just say that?
Jesus, as they believe, is a prophet.
He's a Christian, but his wife's a
God would
Muslim?
have him killed. But I don't think they have any historical evidence, as far as
Did
I
you
know,
say
as
that?
to what or how or why they believe that. I'm curious for you guys both, and if you want to, I guess, go first, Billy, as to how you came about, like the findings where it seems that Jesus was not crucified, or that's not accurate.
Sure. And in my videos, and if you listen to the podcast, the statement is
I
according
were to
to
leave
the
it
Sinai
here.
Bible. Okay. According to the
Cyanide?
Sinai Bible.
Sinai?
Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible. That Bible predates the King James version of the Bible, and the text there actually is about 12 to 14,000 differences
Take a
between
drink, Wes.
the Sinai Bible and the King James version of the Bible, which came much later. And then also one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which according to some scholars, that's a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married, which then, adds more, if that's true, it adds more to the hypothesis that maybe he wasn't crucified. I just personally believe that Jesus was an amazing human being. I don't think that he was the son
People
of God.
personally
in the sense
believe a
that
lot of things that are
he's
wrong all the time.
God, but that we're all gods. As he said, ye are gods, and that we're to do greater things in him. And I just personally believe that the return of the
Was he trying to
Christ
quote scripture there?
is the return of the Christ consciousness.
When he was mocking
When
the
we can all
Pharisees?
achieve a certain level of knowledge, wisdom,
Using the Old
passion,
Testament?
understanding, empathy, love that he
Indicting
came
them?
to this planet with, and we get that in our mind and our conscience, and we can act on that those incredible emotions and that understanding, that the whole world is going to transform instantaneously. And I think at the second coming is the coming of the Christ consciousness to the planet, not a human being flying back to Earth to save people. That's just my personal understanding of how I perceived it over many, many years of going through this information and going through all this text.
And Wes, I'm gonna let you respond to that. And again, I mean, this is everyone listening to the show.
The gauntlet has been thrown
challenge
down.
Everything.
Yeah, that was a
learn
huge
to critically
challenge.
think
A
and
lot of truth
continue to
claims in
come to your
there. A
conclusions.
lot of
Even
assertions.
with
One
Jesus,
at a
I'm not
time.
personally even waiting on that he has to come back to. I already know I'm, like I said, that strength of God and
But not your
consciousness is
wife.
already. I can tap into that right now, so you don't have to wait for him to come back. For
But
those
you're
that
not
believe
your
he
wife.
does, to actually have that like next level of what that's supposed to mean. But Wes, go ahead on
This guy does drugs.
for what Billy was talking about. I think with a book in the Harvard Museum, and I heard something about Jesus's wife. That's, yeah.
Yeah, well, first let me say I think it's really cool to not just be in the room proverbially with you, Billy, but be able to interact with you. Because I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, Toronto, Canada, is a long way away from Florida. It's a little bit of a jaunt. But I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon.
Codex
It's a Bible. I have
Sinaiticus.
a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right? From
Maybe.
Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's
Is
the
that
mountain
what he's talking about?
that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the
Huh.
King James Version being put out.
Sure. So, when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus, like the codex that comes? Okay, that's why I was trying to get some clarification.
There we
Because so you can actually go and see Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library, so you can go and see it. It's on display, and the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here, and the only reason I ask for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else, because the
Well, he
Codex
establishes that he
Sinaiticus
is the
in
authority
particular
on this subject.
is just a Greek. It's a 4th century Greek manuscript. It
He
comes from
just
approximately
gulped
between
hard, and if he
325
didn't, he should
and
have.
350
Mhm.
AD, and its text
He
of
is
the
the most qualified
Gospels
person on the
reads
planet
almost
to
identical
pull his
to
crap
the
apart.
modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just
Wes is
simply
about to body him.
in kind of exploring when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there. I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up
Mark's there.
the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull up a website with the viewers or listeners or whatever be able to see that?
While he's pulling that up too, like I keep saying to all the people that aren't scientists traveling the world and linguists, I don't even know how to pronounce it the right way, like me.
Yeah, linguist.
What
Yeah.
cyanide? I keep thinking of cyanide, like the poison. Cyanide Bible. So
Right.
is that like a version?
You could just let him talk,
So
though. You don't
from
have to
my
understand
own
it.
knowledge that I know, like when I really studied all this, what I thought was interesting about the Bible
Doesn't really matter, though.
was how many
Let him
like
talk.
different eyewitness. I studied C.S. Lewis back in the day. How many different eyewitnesses and stuff there were, and they
Mhm.
went on purpose to mention so many other
Mhm.
names that they were able to like cross-reference
nice.
throughout history
trying to be
and
so
throughout those
polite.
times.
Mm,
From my understanding, and those were different things that I always
Mm.
thought
we're
were
cool.
kind of interesting. That
Good for
that
you.
I felt was a good concept of proof. And then I want Billy to answer, and also I'm just curious, like the Sinai Bible, was that Where was that piece?
The text where I was referencing, actually, I was misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Okay, yeah. Well, so that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with. There are two manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery, and so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So, at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have two copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish. We see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to like around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem.
Never mind that.
But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas. Never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish.
This has been
But
discussed.
the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian and I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible. The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it has the crucifixion.
By any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of. So
I got that from ChatGPT, by the way.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
guys, I'm just
I can
trying to
actually.
sound smart for a second.
I have that from
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, that's
You just let them
Yeah,
talk,
so I'll
though,
show
bud.
you this. So I make. So the
Just let them
documents you
talk.
actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant, and then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. So I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of. And so there's categorizing systems, And the standard one is called the Gregory Allant categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. If it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, 46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all 4 Gospels and Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So the only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, Nash, but I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit, leading up into the New
Well,
Testament.
hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name?
Yeah,
I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing. I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes what happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grondin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grondin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient. And this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' wife, and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' wife. So I just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit. Predominantly, from my research,
So you're
I
done?
discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma
So you're
Elish,
wrong?
the 7 tablets of creation, is
So you're over?
a lot of the in Genesis, a
quitting?
lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because
what do you
obviously
mean?
it's a smaller. Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation.
Enuma
The Epic
Elish.
of Atrahasis as well is also there in the Old Testament. Several other tablets as well, Code of Hammurabi and a few others have made it into that text. Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the Epic of Atrahasis. And so
I'm
we
going
tend to
south.
see this
Let me go see if
copying
that
of
boat's
ancient
there.
text,
I took the spark
scriptures,
plug out.
tombs, and papyruses
I mess with it,
into
so
the biblical text, meaning that my point here is that
we'll see if that
I
spark
think a
plug's
lot of
there.
people are saying that this information was written in real time. lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe that. But a lot of this information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I found. That it's made it into the canonized Bible.
Do I need
But
that
they never
for
reference
that?
that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
I don't need it.
Have you read the
I don't need it.
lineage?
Yeah, I've done lectures.
Do you mind? Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the New Malish for us?
Sure.
Oh my
English is,
goodness, he got.
is a
He's
very
twisting
ancient
it.
text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal. And the summary
He's
of
twisting
it
the
is
knife.
that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 46 times larger than Earth. Earth didn't exist at the time that this, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very popular figure in ancient times in the religious books and texts. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the
That was
one
weird.
that during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat, destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away,
Got
recoalesced,
lagged.
taking the water, land, and
Lag on
organic
that.
material,
Head tilt.
which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt.
Major
Other parts of it
difference.
were thrown towards the sun, and some were
Categorically.
thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system.
In the nature of
This,
creation
this
accounts.
planet or this moonlet that orbited supposedly a brown dwarf, based on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun. And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that Saturn and I believe Neptune switched places. Uranus is flipped on its side, and that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the New Malish also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to utilize us as workers for their workforce. In the Atrahasis epic, you see a much similar story. Slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old, the epic of Atrahasis. And we see a very similar story. And we see where the sons of God literally came down to Earth. They came from Mars, according to this text. If you read the translation of the planet Mars to English. And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle in South Africa against Enki and Anu. And they come to terms without going to battle. They argued that they needed women, human women, believe it or not. They also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities on Earth, and according to the text on Mars, not according to me. And a decision was made by Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here. They would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean they're going to kill it, but somehow some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor and worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident, and many other crazy stories that are in the Bible. You can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient text, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah tablet, giving him instructions how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat, it was a round disc that he built. It's cut with sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe there's a creator of the universe. I
Very
believe
gracious
that,
for
the
letting me
mathematics
finish,
of
yeah.
all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs...
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a Syriologist friend and we walked through it a couple of years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said that there were like verbatim parallels with the biblical creation story. Even just going off of what you said, which I think there are components of that I would agree with, the Battle of the Gods, the concept of Enki and the younger gods, and they fight Tiamat, and then Marduk, who swears he'll defeat Tiamat, and Kwenku, who kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow, and there's this big battle, and then the gods that die end up being the earth and the sky and even us, because we are the end result of that battle. I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
For example, that's in the Enuma Elish. That's also in the biblical text.
Okay, that I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're making this the argument, because if you brought it up, and I mean this with all due respect, there are superficial parallels. I would agree. The separation of the water, the concept of the earth being formless and void. That's also in the Enuma Elish. However, I think all the other details, it's the details that make the difference. And if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, you don't have a creation within 7 days. You don't.
There's certain words that they utilize that let me know that they copied it from that text. Like, for example,
So what?
the void, earth being void. That information is literally just copied over. So it tells you that somebody saw that and said, let me add it to this book right here. Let me add
Sure.
it to this book. All right, it wasn't a book yet at that time.
So
Was this text discovered that makes it parallel to Genesis? Was this like supposedly discovered prior to? I'm just curious.
It wasn't discovered prior to the Bible, but it dates back long before the Bible was.
Yeah, so let me just say this. So the reason why I say it's actually an apologetic against that is because the purpose of the Enuma Elish, which the Babylonians read every Babylonian New Year, was to point out the fact that the deities, and there's countless deities in the Babylonian pantheon, they actually come from the created order. So they're not outside of time and space. They actually come from the created order. And when they die in this battle, right, when Tiamat is defeated, the defeated gods become the earth and the sky and the plants and even you and me. And in that sense, the theme is that you don't actually have any purpose or end result, and you're not created in the image of God. In fact, in the ancient Babylonian system, only the kings were created in the image of God. And what we see that is counter to that is that even, sure, there's superficial, divided the waters, but we find that in almost every society and culture. That's not a parallel as much as just a generality. I would say what we see within the biblical account is that God purposefully creates. There's only one God. He purposefully creates, and then he creates, and it's good. And it continues to say it's good 7 times. And then at the end of chapter 1, just for, the thick people in the original audience, it says, and then it was very good. And then he creates humanity, not kings, but simply the humans that he creates in God's image. And they have purpose and meaning, and that instills them with this creation order. And that's not what we find in the Enuma Elish. In fact, we find the opposite in the Enuma Elish, is that the created order is not good, it's a mistake, and that you are not created in the image of God. And there's a reminder that regular people are not created in the image of God. So linguistically, Hebrew does have Semitic ties with Akkadian. It doesn't with Sumerian. Sumerian is a language isolate, a glutenizing language. But I would say, just with all due respect, the parallels linguistically are not there. There might be superficial kind of concepts that are there, but they're so superficial that we can find them in everything. In the sense of, I'm in an office studio, you're in your office studio. That doesn't mean that that we're the same people, or
You just got
we're
bodied.
even in the same place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I just
Whatever
think,
you say.
if I have all these texts out, there's a lot of different information that you can see. There's a lot of different copied word for word in the text.
You got destroyed.
But what's the word for word?
In your version of what you believe in, you keep saying that God's a he.
Yep.
So where do you get that from?
Well, throughout both the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, you have the masculine singular pronoun used for God.
Right.
And why is God a man? Where's the evidence of this?
Because you have the master
Well,
singular
God isn't a
pronoun
man.
used
See,
for
within
God.
historical Christianity, we don't believe that God has a gender. However, the way
Not a
that
man.
he has decided to reveal himself is
Is
through
with the masculine
masculine
singular
plural, and then ultimately by
and
becoming
masculine
a
plural.
human in the person of Jesus Christ. So we don't believe that God has a gender. In fact, the fact that God creates humanity in his image and he creates them male and female, those are 2 aspects of the image of God, and so that's the completeness. So historical Christianity has never argued that God is gendered. Jesus is gendered in the sense that during the incarnation, he becomes a human man, but he's still fully man and fully God. But God is spirit, and right, as the scripture says, we worship him in spirit and in truth. But nobody's arguing that. What's that? Sorry?
That always blows my mind.
God
too.
is the same all the time, right? He's always good. God's all the same all the time.
Okay, what's your...
Yeah, but we do see that in Scripture, God has revealed himself through the masculine plural. And there are aspects of God's character that we see within Scripture that do actually communicate. Jesus says that he longs to gather Israel like a mother hen collects her chicks. So we see aspects of, the feminine of God, not meaning that God is feminine, but that the image of God reflects both the masculine and the feminine. And that's why when, the 2 become one flesh, there's a uniting
Think
of that
about
reflects the image of
these
God as well within the covenant of marriage.
Do you actually believe that the majority of Christians really believe that God
It doesn't matter.
is not masculine, that God has both aspects? If you-
I mean, it's irrelevant to the majority of Christians believe.
how many would
Yeah.
that God's not a man?
Oh, baby.
They never been taught this.
Well, I was taught it growing up. I was taught it in when I was a child, when I went to seminary, when I went to Bible college. I was taught it in graduate school. I would say I would say a few things to that. I would say, in one sense, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe, because what historical biblical Christianity articulates is what they should believe. There are Christians who run around saying all sorts of things that are not in conformity to biblical, historical, Orthodox Christianity. And they should believe that, because it's irrelevant. And so if one Christian believes something that is not in line with biblical Christianity, I mean, that's on them. So God is not gendered, but he does express through inspired scripture the masculine the masculine
Singular.
pronoun.
Human beings weren't Christians and Jesus put their boots on the neck of women for Eve.
What? What are you talking about, bro?
Also, I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, so hold on, let me speak to that, because it is interesting that,
guys, I have to.
yeah, sure.
If it was only for the Old Testament, I would have a hard time following
Let him finish,
a lot
bro.
of stuff.
It's okay.
For
It's
me,
okay, bro.
like what you said, putting the boots
Write
on
about it
women,
later.
stuff, it
Let
was
them
when
finish.
Jesus came.
It's okay, bro. Let them
when they were
finish.
literally like, oh, if a woman, you can just accuse a female of having an affair and
Let them finish.
murder, and that's like okay. That
It's
he
okay,
was
bro.
Like he just reminds me of anyone that basically challenged
Okay.
everything.
Yeah.
And
Okay, be quiet.
people would say that it didn't contradict what's in the Old Testament, but however people were interpreting it, they were believing that they were following the Bible to women can't do this, you stone them if they have an affair or if they're accused of having an affair. And Jesus, as we know, the famous scene when they were about to stone him, he's like, who has sinned? And was the first one that I know of that started like speaking to other tribes and other countries that people weren't supposed to, like they were so racist and prejudiced, and this is where my heart opened up, is like he stood for this love and this God that
Okay, bro.
broke down all these barriers
Okay, bro.
and just flipped
Okay,
what
bro.
all the scholars and everything was saying on its head. And that's where I found that I
Okay.
believe that he was
Let him-
crucified because he went so far like against the grain at the time. And I get what you're saying too, like there's stuff where it's like, oh, that's convenient, where human beings can add in that this is there and that's not. But something else
I can't believe a ton of boat. I can't believe the boat's on this map.
Especially the New Testament, if it was like written by man and stuff and pre-planned, I'm like, I think they would have done a better job of not making a lot of the people so like ignorant. The people that were like literally with Jesus questioning them half the time, like, bro, I don't know if you can do this miracle. And Jesus is like, dude, you just saw me yesterday turn water into wine. And I'm like, if they really, if I was writing a story, I'm like, I want everyone to believe this, I would make the people not like is questionable. It's like they have so many characteristics where the humanity in it is what like always drew me. And like even one thing in the Old Testament that David and Goliath kills Goliath, a man after God's own heart. I'm like, if you're pre-writing this to be the perfect person after God's own heart, then he becomes king. You're gonna like have the story end perfectly, but then he goes off to see, he's watching this lady bathe nude, has an affair with her, has her husband killed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but then goes on to keep praying to God and coming back to God like with a humanity, and God's like, this is a man after my own heart. And it's like finding all these human flaws is, to me, showed so much of like the beautiful struggle that, and I'm not going off everything you guys are talking about, which is factual stuff. I'm just
No, I
talking
know.
from my own
We know.
experience of ways where I drew and continue to draw
Everyone
my own
knows.
conclusions. And
Yeah, back to the
I'm
conversation
much
though.
more about my relationship
Yeah, I know. We
with
know.
God personally, with
We know.
Jesus and God. It's the same over
Yeah.
worshiping the religion,
Okay.
because so many people can
But let them finish though.
As we all know, that's wars are created, slaves are taken. There's so many horrible things that have been done
Let them talk about it though.
in the name of religion.
Ask them a question.
And it's sad, and that's where Jesus comes back into the game to me. I'm talking, you guys, to me, to where he was like the
We
one
know.
that was like gathering all these people of all these, like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Like, we're supposed to be here helping each other. This is about loving each other and coming together. Like, you're killing them because they eat meat on Tuesday and they don't eat bacon on Sunday, and you're
no.
literally like
You could just let
murdering
'em
each
finish,
other.
though.
It's so messed up. So
Crossbow.
I get
Crossbow.
where people look at different organized religion and stuff, and
You.
they're like, this is horrible.
Beautiful.
Like, on behalf of Christians, I'm like, I'm fully apologetic
I know.
for, what was it,
I know you
the
are.
Crusades. It's like, in
'Cause
the
you don't
name of
understand what-
Catholicism, there's
what you're
so
talking
many
about.
horrible things that human beings have done. And I'm speaking as someone that
I know,
would
that
call
doesn't know what
myself
you're
a
talking
Christian.
about. I
I'm just
know,
letting everyone
okay.
know that I'm
It's a
an
Muslim
open,
life.
critical thinker,
you're
and how I
open
continue
Christian.
to find my own beliefs, because I never sat here ignorantly and was like, nope, throughout history they've all been perfect. It's like, through the Crusades, they went through and committed genocide, rape, some of the most awful stuff, wearing these huge crosses. And I'm like, but God wasn't with them. They said he was, but that's why I also believe in the devil. And I don't believe he's this dude with a pitchfork and a red tail. I think it's more comes, in energy and thoughts, and comes in people, and is like, oh, talks to this guy who's rising in power. You should start
Yeah.
conquering that other country in the name of, and do it in the name of God.
There's-
And then, that's the way I look at things. So anyway, go ahead. I
Yeah,
had to
thanks,
just throw
man.
in.
Thanks,
Yeah,
man.
I mean,
okay,
there's
anyway,
a really great resource written by a friend of mine, John Dixon. It's a book called Bullies and Saints.
Take a drink, man.
Where he goes
You
through a
earned
lot
it.
of the
You've been talking a
instances
lot,
where
bro.
obviously you're going to find abuses, and every human being is going to find a way to exploit whatever is presented to them. So in one sense, I think we can say, isn't it convenient that God used the masculine plural pronoun, or sorry, the masculine pronoun. I keep saying plural. It's just a mistake.
Slip
The
of the tongue.
masculine pronoun.
You're okay with
And we can
mistakes.
say, oh,
You're not
sure,
dumb.
that's convenient, maybe, but it is how he
You make
has
mistakes all the time.
revealed himself to us, and it's not his fault if we abuse that. I mean, we could say, so I grew up in the Middle East. My parents worked in Amman, Jordan, and when I was living in the Middle East, there was a country called the Democratic Republic of Iraq. Now, just because democracy exists and people are going to name things democratic when they obviously aren't, doesn't mean we then judge democracy. I mean, think of the Democratic Republic of North Korea, right? Nobody thinks that that's an actual representation of democracy. So people are always going to abuse terms and ideas and concepts. The difference is, though, I think historically within Judeo-Christianity, you have this ethic that we were talking about before that I think is fundamentally different than what we find in things like the Enuma Elish, the Atrasis, and other things, in that we are created in the image of God. And actually, one of the earliest criticisms of Christianity are by individuals like Celsus, who is a Greco-Roman philosopher in the 2nd century, where he accused Christianity of being foolish, dishonorable, and stupid, and he called it the religion of slaves, women, and children. Why? Not because God used the masculine pronoun for himself and people were abusing that, because the concept that Christians believed in of everybody, no matter what your gender, your race, your social standing, Paul says in Christ there is no slave nor free, there is no Jew nor Gentile, there is no Scythian or barbarian, there's no male nor female. These things united people. And we can see there's a historian named Rodney Stark, and in his book, The Rise of Christianity, he actually says that you can track empirically the agency of women across the ancient world by the movement of Christianity. So that, in other words, whenever an area became populated by Christians, we see a direct correlation of religious treatments of women of expanding time when the surrounding culture largely didn't view women as equal. So I think we're always going to have abuses, but if there's one worldview that exists that gives agency to people, that says that everybody has worth by nature being just human, it's the Christian worldview. And that's why I think it's very different. So we can argue about why people God further shouldn't have revealed himself in his pronouns. But I think that's actually irrespective of the historical reality that we see within the impact of Christianity, particularly on the West, but around the world, and how it gives agency to the marginalized.
Wes, can I ask you one? So so I'm always interested. It's like you were raised Christian. I always think about this. Like my wife is Muslim, and our beliefs at the core are so similar, but there's some differences. And I wonder, like, if I was born in Sierra Leone, West Africa, where she was,
There's another
I know
boat.
the Bible says Christ revealed, but C.S. Lewis is someone that I really respect, because I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a think outside the box, always, and we should be. No one should just be like sheep and follow what any of us are saying. Like, do your research on your own with everything, of course. But what led you, going back to C.S. Lewis real quick, he was a famous scholar who was once an atheist, set out on a journey to basically disprove the Bible. As he went to do that, he himself found out that to be like one of the most historically accurate written books, which really shocked him. He then
Another boat.
became a Christian after that. He's done the Narnia movies, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Oh, they're books. They weren't movies when he passed away. But he has an amazing... I love people like him because he doesn't just act like... He always was questioning everything. He's like, why is there this going? Why are these little kids dying, God, when they're... But something that he continued to come up with, which reminded me so much of Jesus and the love conquers all things too, is when so many people overly get caught up on religion over the relationship. And he's like, I've actually met some atheists that are closer to God without even knowing.
Oh, what are you talking about,
And
brother?
I've met some Christians that are further away from God without even knowing. And I believe that too so much. And I'm just really curious, like, as you went on your journey as being like a historian, studying biblical texts, and then being raised, of the church, did you take it, I don't want to put what, did you take it upon, like, whatever I continue to discover, I'm going to have to accept, like, say something you did find when you were in Egypt revealed differently than what you were taught. Like, did you kind of tell yourself, I'm going on a quest, like searching for truth without like a set conclusion to prove Christianity, knowing that it could go either way? Am I making
Jeez.
sense?
Yeah, I mean, I
Sal's
grew
got
up
the
in
boats.
a bit of an unusual household in that my mom grew up in India, and my parents, when I was younger, I was born in Pakistan, and I spent a portion of my childhood in Jordan. I grew up in majority Muslim countries and surrounded by majority Muslim environments. And we had, a copy of the Quran in the room. In fact, we had the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon, and for a little while, other documents in our house. These were things that my parents, although they never verbally said, these Christianity is true, therefore these are not forbidden. These are not verboten. The truth, capital T truth, of the reality of the world that we hold can stand up against scrutiny and investigation. And
That's
I
right.
did do
Amen.
a great
That's
deal of
freedom
that
in
as a kid.
Christ.
My
That is
dad
freedom.
is a historian as
Amen.
well. He has a doctorate, and I grew up on him, reading the rise and
Amen.
fall of the Roman Empire. But at the exact same time, the reason why I actually went to university with full intention of going into the police force, but it was interactions with Muslims and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and atheists and accusations against the credibility of the Bible, which actually piqued my interest, because they would say things that I said that I thought, if that's true, of course that undermines what I believe. I believe that Jesus is God incarnate. If I can't trust the Gospels as reliable first-century eyewitness testimony, then I might as well throw all of this away, because I'm not going to believe a lie, even if it's a convenient lie. And so it was actually exploration of eventually going into graduate college and then now in working on my PhD, the largest secular university in Canada, that got me thinking, okay, how do we investigate these things? What are the methodologies by which we go about to explore the origins and credibility of something like the Bible? And that investigation with all due respect to Billy and the content that you put out, has actually confirmed what I believe. You know, I'm dealing with the actual manuscripts. I travel to academic institutions, to other countries, and I look at these things and I read them. And it's a privilege to be able to learn languages like Greek and Coptic and Hebrew and Aramaic and dig into these things. And I think ultimately, I really appreciate what you said there, Mark, with your articulation of your personal relationship. And I think that's so important. But I think it's also important to remember that that relationship is based on something that's real and verifiable. And we can look into the evidence. You know, I have friends who are linguists, philologists, and historians. And when we look into these things and we talk with one another and we're discussing, we're constantly trying to falsify our theories, because that's what good history does. We're looking for the falsification. You don't go in, ideally, if you want to be a good historian,
Right.
with trying to prove your original thesis. You go in and say, okay, what are the avenues that actually could disprove this? And then how do we engage with those in an appropriate and articulate manner? So what I believe is true, but I believe it based on the evidence of the actual documentation. You know, I've read a lot of the literature that you're talking about, Billy, the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis, the Bhagavad Gita, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I've read some of them in their original languages because I've tried to be a good historian and go back into the primary sources. Or if I can't, engage with people like my friends who are Assyriologists, who are philologists, and try to not just go off of a translation, but the original. And I think I've found largely the opposite of the conclusions that you have made, Billy. And I know that you are very passionate about what you talk about, and I respect that. I just think that the confidence
evidence
might not
is
actually be
against
backed
what
up
you're
by the reality
saying.
of the evidence. So when we're looking at something like the Sinai Bible, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Barnabas, when we're looking at something like the Gospel of Jesus' wife, these are things that actually have provenance that we can verify. And ultimately, I think the answers to the questions of the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of those things point to not just a different conclusion, but actually the opposite conclusion, and that Christianity is true.
Well, now I'm glad you said that. So those three topics are a very
Oh
small
my
piece
gosh, he bodied
of my
him.
concept and idea of what really happened in the ancient past.
Doesn't
That's a
matter,
very
bro.
small
You don't
fraction.
understand what he
And that's
just did to
less than
you.
0.1% when you
Oh
talk
my
about eyewitness
goodness.
accounts convinced you that Christianity is real.
It's over.
There's been eyewitness accounts of every culture that I've visited around this entire planet, and their eyewitness accounts of what they experienced is 100,000% opposite of what's in the Bible. People have
Based on what do you mean? Can you give me an example?
the Dogon tribe, for example, in Mali, Africa. They experienced a culture that they claim came to this planet from Sirius B. They have the evidence that they knew these beings were from Sirius B because they have the instruments that show the orbit of a trinary star system that we couldn't discover until the 1970s with our modern technology. Okay, they understood not only the orbital pattern of Sirius A, B, and C, but even that B was a failed star, which you can't see it from Earth with the naked eye. They knew that it was a white dwarf. They even knew that they said that if you took a tablespoon of it, the entire tribe or 1,000 men couldn't lift the tablespoon. They understood mass and gravity as well. They were told the shape, the sizes, and the colors of all the planets in our solar system, which they recorded. And there's only one wisdom keeper, and that person can never be touched by a person. If they get touched by another person, they'd actually be killed. And then they eventually have a mentee that they break down that verbally handed down knowledge to, and that next person that takes over becomes the wisdom keeper. And they've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And science, modern science, has found all their information to be 1,000% accurate. Then you have the Hopi tribe of the Americas, indigenous tribes, Hopi tribe, Lakota tribe, also having engagements with these quote-unquote Star Brothers, even having an account of them being taken underground, which you don't see just only in America. I just came back from Turkey. You have the people from Turkey in Mesopotamia also being taken underground into a place called Derin Kuyu by these beings, by these people, a structure that's built 12 stories deep underground, that's made out of volcanic tuff, a very soft stone, and if you don't know what you're doing, it'll actually collapse. There's no evidence of any collapse, and it was thousands of years old. It was reused many times. So the mainstream story about what it was used for to hide from Romans is actually false. This place is ancient, and in order to build it, you actually have to have foreknowledge of how to construct this type of an underground civilization that can hold 20 to 30,000 people. It's places for livestock, places for worship, with no sign of collapse. And you have to have hundreds of ventilation shafts, and I've been down there. Those ventilation shafts cut through solid rock all the way down to the core. And there's even more. It links to other underground cities that are miles and miles away. As you get to the very base of this area, you can cut through and go to another location. But again, these people were taken under. Also, then you have the ancient Egyptians. Similar story. Major catastrophe comes. These people come and take them underground. Then you have the information in the Egyptian book of Going Forth by Day. More accounts by people, our ancestors, that have accounts that do not match up with the biblical text. And so all of a sudden we're saying that all these cultures, the Aboriginal people, I can go into them as well. I've gone to walk about
Do you mind?
In the outback,
Yeah.
the Aboriginal elders, same thing. They were seated here by Pleiades. This is their verbal handed down history for thousands of years. And I can go around the world and I can come up with all this information from all these eyewitness accounts from people that should be respected, dignified, and shouldn't be scoffed. And that we're now saying that all this information that they put forth, all their verbal handed down history, all their written history, that's got to go to the side, because this one text is 1,000% accurate.
Sure, but so my question is, most of that is oral history, correct?
Oh, it's all oral history, even the Bible.
Okay, so when we're engaging with oral history, what methodologies are you using to confirm that the orality is accurate?
Well, first and foremost, some of these texts some of these cultures have written down information.
That was a pretty simple
Caves.
question.
You've got cave paintings.
No.
The Dogon tribe actually have not only written down.
Sure. No, I don't
It
disagree
wasn't
with
a-
that.
it wasn't
The
a
question
question.
is one of historic.
What are you
Sorry, I
using
didn't mean to interrupt you there.
to
The question is one
determine-
of methodological analysis. So
Correct.
you have to have a method by which you can find either that something is falsifiable or that there are avenues by which you can show internal and external accuracy of credibility. So this is what we do with documents. This is what we do with the ancient Gospels. This is what I do. I've worked on Xenophon and Plutarch. And we look at the internal evidences and the external multivalent corroboration to try to figure out, okay, yes, we have all these stories. Great. I don't deny that. But as a historian, as someone who's trying to figure out what is accurate, how do you know if I use the term verisimilitude, do you know what that term means?
No, but I can tell you this. Tell me how the Dogon tribe saw Sirius B, knew the orbit of Sirius B, a trinary star system, accurately, and can show you the orbit with a special tool that they made that was given to them by these
Sure.
people. How do they know the shape,
Granted.
the sizes, the colors, and the orbital pattern of all these planets in our solar system, and other star alignments that they would use to have something called the Ziggy and planet and their own harvesting and planting and so forth and so on? That's not enough evidence though, that there's something.
Well, I'm not I'm not aware of that particular case. And even, I mean, I would grant that, the ancient people are far more technological advanced than we give themselves credit for. Just because they're ancient doesn't mean they're stupid. I am well aware, as someone who has done both investigation of the past and done archaeological analysis, that is a reality. My question is simply, okay, you have these stories, or you have these accounts, you're referring to them as eyewitness testimony. How are you going about verifying that as that?
Well, if the people had eyewitness testimony about Jesus, they then just wrote down their eyewitness testimony on a piece of paper or
He
a
doesn't.
parchment
He's
paper
not understanding the
or
question.
papyrus. So these people,
Right.
methods
So
are
that's
using
where
to verify
internal
it.
methodological
Correct.
analysis.
it's actually written down. So I mean, it's the same exact thing. There's really no difference.
Well, no. So you do internal investigations to figure out when something was dated. So something like so when I use that term verisimilitude before, that's something we as historians are looking for. It's a term that simply means the appearance or likelihood of truthfulness. So when you do historical analysis, it's an inference to the best explanation. So you have proof and you have data, and you're extrapolating that data on levels of probability. So some things can be confirmed as high probabilistically true, and other things are lower in their probability that they happen. But there are different methodologies, different ways that you explore historically how that happens. So for the Gospels, we look at
Scientists went there to visit the tribe, and they still have no answers because they used their modern science. They took the best scholars to visit these people, and they're still scratching their heads. Something happened there.
sure.
that
And
doesn't-
and I'm not even denying that necessarily, but the question is, okay, we need different levels of evidence and exploration, not just scientifically, but historically, to derive something as eyewitness testimony. Now we have mountains of that, and I'm more than willing to go into some of that with the Gospels as early eyewitness testimony that can be verified externally and internally. But nonetheless, the only reason I ask, Billy, is because I've listened to a fair amount of your content, and I'm unaware of the methods that you use to try to discern between what is an accurate source historiographically and an inaccurate source historiographically.
Well,
Does that make sense?
I use getting in the airplane and traveling to these places, doing my own research,
He doesn't
talking with
understand.
indigenous cultures, and researching as much of the text that is available that I can possibly find.
Okay, so I don't dispute that, and I do believe you have done that, but I mean, even from what we've talked about, so you've researched the text, but when we talked about the crucifixion, everything you cited was either, and I mean with all due respect, false in terms of the Sinai Bible, because Codex Sinaiticus is just a 4th century Greek manuscript of the Gospels that we have today, or they were verified forgeries in terms of
Yeah,
the Gospel of Jesus' wife and the Gospel of
right,
Barnabas.
you may be right on that particular part of the topic, but like I said, that's less than 1/10% of the information that I hold.
Sure, but that was the original question. So yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, okay, well, so I'm going off of what we've already talked about. So you said you explore the text. I don't deny that. But the evidence by going off of what you have put forward in terms of the actual documentary evidence is not just less than convincing in my respect, and I mean this with respect because I think you have done a lot of research. You've traveled to these places. I have too. Like, this is what I do as my career. But I'm not really getting indication because in history we go to the primary sources in their primary languages. And
Really
when we
not getting
talk, when Mark
indication that
asked,
you
okay, why do you
understand
deny the
what
crucifixion?
I'm talking
The
about
sources
either,
you
much less what you're
use
talking about.
were not primary.
We're still talking
And
about
they-
the same thing over and over again. There's so much more we can talk about here. We're wasting a lot of time. There's so
Right,
much
but-
more. That's this amount.
Do you
There's
guys
so
Sure.
much more stuff to talk about.
Wait,
do you
kid.
think that
Sometimes
all
let's find out.
these
Ask
different
them.
cultures and stuff describing these other beings,
Oh my
could those have
lord.
been? I'm not
Coulda.
an expert theologian, or
Let
whatever,
'em
but
talk
like
about
where
it.
it talks about war. I always want to personally ask you this too, where in the
Okay,
Bible
we'll do
it talks
it.
about like wars between the demons and the angels. There's a lot of crazy stuff in the Bible too that
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man.
it's you can prove
Yeah.
it's been written, but it also takes some faith because you can't physically see where there was wars between demons and angels and stuff fighting in the heavens. So there's tons going on, obviously.
Yeah, there's a lot
Could-
going on. You
Could
wanna
any of
talk
those have
about it?
been, like from what you've discovered or how people have written it, do you think those
Do
could
you
have
let them
been
talk about it?
demons or angels? Which I don't think
I don't believe in
discredits.
demons and angels at all.
You don't believe them at all?
Nah, I don't believe in demons and angels. When you read Azazel coming down in the book of Enoch, coming down and the person that was to teach people how to make swords, then cut a man's head off. You read, you see these quote unquote.
Where's that in the book of Enoch?
In the book of Enoch, Azazel. He comes down and he teaches.
Where is that in the book of Enoch? Is it the only reason I ask is because there are two Enochs, first Enoch and second Enoch, and only first Enoch is an actual historical amalgamation.
And then you analyze the fact that these angels are having
What was
sex,
his answer?
getting drunk. These are just people.
What did he say?
Where are angels getting drunk?
Angels party. They go. They hang out with people. They go to war with people. They put on their outfits and go to war with people. This is
Where are they getting drunk though?
They get married. Okay, whatever that means. But they're having.
They don't get married.
Okay.
In fact, Scripture says that angels can't kill.
He's just saying whatever he wants at this point. Angels getting married, but
Mary, M-E-R-R-Y. But the point that I'm making here is when you start to really analyze what these
Like
these
you did?
angels are doing, and you start to analyze how many people are dying in the biblical text, you start to say, well, how many people did Satan actually kill? And when you start doing the tally on the numbers, God's doing most of the killing in the Bible. It's not the devil that's doing all the killing. And then God says in Isaiah, I created the good and I created the evil. Do what I say, the Lord. So he's saying that he's doing the good and the evil. That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
My personal
I mean-
opinion on this whole thing, I just let me get this out because we keep going over the same rhetoric over and over again. My personal opinion is that the biblical text is a good book. Like I've said, I've got videos. My number one video on Twitter has me saying this. It's good text because if you actually apply some of the information that's in the Bible, you can get a good result, like you have done, Mark.
Right.
get the
I
result.
struggle with no, I want you to finish your thought. Go ahead.
yeah, you do.
So
No,
because
he
you can get a
does
result,
struggle.
But there's a lot of misinformation in the Bible. There's a lot of false information that's copy from ancient text. And if you go by that text, all of a sudden you end up with 400 years of slavery. You end up with abuse. You end up with divide and conquer tactics that separate people. You end up with people thinking that they're the chosen ones and they're the chosen people, and we've been promised this promised land so we can eradicate another race of people because
Oh,
this is our
he's
land.
just,
because
I
God promised it to us.
understand what's
You have
going
people
on.
that want to go on the papal inquisitions and torture and kill and murder over 80 million people. You have the
I know
American
this. I
Holocaust,
understand
111
what's
million
going on.
indigenous natives slayed. You have all this going on because of this text,
Oh, there's a lot
which
going
is
on.
set up so contradictory throughout its path across time. You get into the New Testament, slavery is still being condoned in the New Testament.
Was it?
Honor thy slave master as you would honor God or Jesus, it says, I believe. So,
So,
in Ephesians.
well,
The
it
Old
doesn't.
I
It
always
doesn't say
saw
that. But
the God of the Old
Let-
Testament.
let-
too. Like I'll let you go real quick, but I'm
Yeah,
just.
yeah.
I
Let him
know
do it.
you
Let
have
him
to
go
listen
real
to it,
quick.
but I'm speaking
Yeah, let him go.
as I challenge my own sub. It was always.
You don't have to though.
I'm telling you guys, this is where Jesus came in and changed everything for me. But like the Old Testament too, it is hard for me to read.
So then
Even
listen.
Noah thinking God's like mad at everyone.
Just
Let's
listen.
flood the whole world and murder all these people that I created.
That's pretty fast stuff.
But it seems so contradictory to, and I'm speaking, Wes, as a Christian, and
Murder?
I don't have the whatever they call
Just
papyrus.
curious
There
word.
isn't. This is where people.
Here's word
and,
used there.
but I continue to follow in my heart. But it's
Oh.
so Jesus did not seem like that at all.
Yep.
But they say God's the same as then as he was now. Like time, he created time. So he didn't come down, as Jesus and change and evolve and then come back with new information and be like, you know what, I don't think I'm going to flood and do. These are more, I guess, like bigger moral questions that there's not necessarily, but
How would I take a wheel there?
that's where things like the Old Testament challenge me at times. And I know
Cool
there's a lot of
story,
things where they
bro.
correlate, and
I
I've
mean
seen
it.
some cool things that come together too.
Anyway.
But it's just like, man,
Yeah,
you
it
think,
is
like,
just
I'm gonna
like
flood
man.
and murder all these people that I created, and then
It's
leave
just
a
like
few
man.
alive.
Couple of
Doesn't
points
seem like what Jesus did at
I'm
all.
sorry to interrupt
No,
you,
it's
but
all
a
right.
couple more points I want to make because you got a lot of talking in. But it did say, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear as sincerity of heart as you would obey Christ. That's slaves. Obey your earthly masters with respect and fear as you, with sincerity in your heart, just as you would obey Christ. So it does say that in Ephesians 6:5, but there's so many
That
aspects.
stuff is what.
And what is the context of what Ephesians is saying? So I think this is very important because that we don't take text in isolation. So within Scripture, and this is why all the abolition movements throughout history have only been Judeo-Christian movements. There's never been an abolition movement that wasn't Christian.
Right.
And actually, there's the recent work by historian Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, different Tom Holland, but his recent work, Dominion, highlights this fact very well. This is not a Christian, but in it, he shows that going right back into the antiquity with the Cappadocian Fathers was the first abolition movement, and then into the British and the American abolition movements. These were fundamentally Christian movements ran by Christians because of the idea that when Paul, who wrote that letter to Ephesians, says, in Christ there is no slave nor free, he's breaking down those barriers. So in Ephesians, when he says, slaves obey your masters, he's operating on the socioeconomic context of what he's going on. And he's saying, hey, we have slaves and we have free people, okay? If you're a believing slave, if you're a slave who believes in Jesus as the Messiah, don't be equitable in how you are living your life. Reflect Christ accurately. And that's a movement that he is fundamentally working towards, that eventually starts to completely take out the legs
This
from
is where
the
we would
slave
argue,
movement in
Wes.
general.
I would be. I love. By the way, I love that we're all. This is respectful. I don't feel this is all just
Yeah.
three
All
grown-ups
love, all
talking
love.
in
I
a healthy
appreciate
way.
this. I appreciate that.
I and I think this is gonna give us. But this is where you and I sitting down in the room. I would be like, great that you came to that, but like, what were the methodologies did you use to conclude that him saying the slave be the master to the slave, you're able to interpret it meaning that he's meaning that? Because I was also raised in the church, and I would question when they're like, oh, in the old days when they said women don't wear jewelry, that's a sin. You would know the exact verse.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, but
Yeah.
that was just written because at that time that was what they did. But then the next week they're telling me, but if you believe in the Bible, you either believe in all of it or none of it. I'm like, well, how come you're just...
Yes.
And they're like, but it's okay for women to do that. Now, those are the things where it's like, we've got to be honest here. Like, if you're respectfully challenging Billy, and Billy's going to go and do
Yes.
research and be like, okay, now I want to see how to have, because we're all critical thinkers. Those things seem to just get so blindly pushed over when they're like, but that doesn't apply now. And it's like, I don't,
Who says that?
Right.
I think there's more common ground than people think, and so many words stuff recall, but also, like, it's weird to me to think that he would be like, women aren't allowed to wear jewelry and this crap, and then Jesus came and he's like, none of that matters. And then for them to be like,
Yeah.
oh, that only made sense then, but now it doesn't apply. But believe everything.
Right.
in the
So this
Bible
is what's
all
referred
applies.
to.
You know what? Like,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
a
yeah.
Christian
This is what's
myself,
ref-
this is why, like, I'm always like,
Yeah. So there's a field, there's a discipline called hermeneutics, and that's the methodology of interpretation. So there are multiple levels that you interpret something. So whether we're dealing with, say, the book of Ephesians, or we're dealing with Tacitus's Annals, we look at something and we contextually read it within the framework of how it's being written. So there's a historical approach where we look at the context. Okay, Paul is writing to a church in Ephesus. What's going on in Ephesus, and how is what he's saying in that city in what is modern day Turkey, how does that pertain to that particular time and framework? Where is Paul coming
how does
from?
it
Where
pertain to
is
now, though, is my question. Because
yeah? So
you're giving me
here's
your
how I
whole-
answer that question.
and I
Yeah,
love
so-
you to death, Wes, but you're starting to give. Sorry, I had to interrupt you. I believe in God. Like, I believe in
Yeah.
and Billy believes in God too. I get why things are challenged and things need to be challenged, but it's saying that was to women then, but being raised
So-
in the church
so it's
and
yes
stuff,
and no.
they say, but
Right.
then they'll pick something and they're like, but that doesn't apply to them now, because in that context he was talking to this certain town
Yeah.
where they were having problems with I'm like, well, that's not written anywhere. And they're like, well, if you go to blah blah blah, and then they say, well, God is all knowing, so he perfectly chose what was in and out of the Bible. I believe whoever created the universe, which is God, in my own opinion, is way smarter than any of us. Why would he leave something like that crap in there, that women shouldn't wear jewelry and all that, and then have in the New Testament that crap doesn't really matter? Like, that's where
Yeah.
it's like, I have to believe that it's not I do think there is parts where things got written in, and I don't think they're the major things personally. like whether or not Jesus was crucified, which I think is a major thing, because if he wasn't, that I've studied that a lot. That would challenge that would challenge the core of my whole belief system over whether or not it said if women can wear jewelry or something. But I do think that, and I don't know if there's an exact answer to this, but I do think, that's perplexing to me.
No,
the God of all wisdom would choose to leave some of that in there. It's like, why?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. There is an original audience, whether that's the ancient Israelite in the ancient Near Eastern culture, or whether it's the Greco-Roman believer in Jesus within the city of Ephesus. So as historians, and I mean, most of the books on this end of my shelf are what are referred to as commentaries.
Sorry, I got to
theologians and historians.
Wouldn't God be smart enough to know I'm not just going to write to this demographic of this civilization now, knowing I'm a God who created the whole world, and people are still going to be studying
He
this
did, and just open
thousands
your
of
ears.
years later.
Yeah.
Trying to teach you.
Yes.
So I'm sorry.
No. So
By the way,
here's how I
teach
would
you.
I'm the
answer that,
worst
Mark.
interrupter ever, and it's
Yeah.
it's more of my ADD type thing of like, I get a thought and I got to get it out, or else
Yeah,
like, we could forget it.
selfishness.
So I'm sorry about
Yeah.
interrupting.
It's okay.
Thanks for throwing me under the bus for that.
Yeah. So how I would answer that is I would say this. So you do have examples of where Paul is writing, and he's writing to a particular group. And so we look at, okay, what does it mean for a woman to wear and adorn themselves with gold in a first century Greco-Roman context, right? It has to do with the fact that prostitutes would wear those things. So we need to ask the question, what is the intention of the text? So
Sorry,
yes,
I gotta
we
ask
can
you again,
take the
though.
meaning.
But how do you interpret that's what I've been, the reason I'm interrupting you is I've heard this. I've been there, done that.
Yeah.
I respect the crap out of you for how deep you go into studying the ancient texts and stuff, which is so important for the real root of it all. But they've told me that same thing, and I'm like, but why doesn't it just say that he was speaking to the women and stuff that were prostitutes of that time? Like, where does
No,
that
he's not
correlate?
speaking to prostitutes. He's talking about purity, and he's talking in the context of when he says, don't adorn yourself with jewelry. The original audience, and we can explore this by
Do you
the historical
realize how
analysis.
dumb that sounds?
Nope.
Saying the original audience, then later on saying, but now it's okay for this audience because these women and stuff.
No,
No,
because it's the point that
prostitution
he's
is
making.
still
I get why
bad.
people, like, if we're gonna, we got to be open-minded. We're punching holes in other stuff to punch holes in our own, and
Then
even if
shut
it's agreeing,
your
like,
mouth.
don't you think that's a little? I get what you're saying. Like, if prostitutes at that right now, if prostitutes all wear a red band around their neck, and that signals what all prostitutes are, and it's like, don't wear that.
Prostitutes have tattoos, and a lot of women who aren't prostitutes have tattoos.
Right. I don't think it's as black and white that only the prostitute, and also you're only talking about in one little town. So my bigger question would be to God,
Well, in Greco-Roman
like,
antiquity,
why did you put that
Yeah.
in the Bible?
So
That just
take-
confuses everyone.
I
Because
think
all
that
these
God
other
didn't-
civilizations are going to
I
be
think we
reading
have
that.
we have something we keep saying here. God didn't put that in the Bible. Men put this stuff in the Bible.
And I think that was some of the old. I'm telling you, Billy. It's for me. I think he'll get back on. If it wasn't for. Sorry, we got you back on, Wes.
I
I need to
understand what
sign
you're
you.
saying, Mark, but what I'm saying is I think we're missing a big point here. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the Bible is written by people, men who are extremely flawed. And the evidence of that is what they did, what they took the information that's in that biblical text and what they did with it globally to other human beings, and how they even wrote about it in the Bible, how they enslaved and tortured people in the biblical text. So in that case, even in the book of Deuteronomy, which is one of the most brutal books out there, where everything is given okay to rape women, kill children. If one person talks against your Lord, go to that town and kill the whole town, burn the town down. It's just too much. Like I said,
turns people into salt.
the
and
killing in the Bible is not being done by Satan. That's why I don't care. I don't believe in demons and all this other kind of stuff. Moses goes to the top. He talks to God. He gets his tablet. The first big
how you
commandments
can
are,
be a Christian
thou
and
shalt not
not?
kill. He comes down. As soon as he sees the people making a golden calf, he kills most of them. It's just like, come on.
Believe
And,
scripture.
and I've learned with some of these stories how it correlated with kill your first son, related to then what happened with Jesus. But I'm still like, in my head, they're like, that's so beautiful. He was willing to sacrifice his son as God would. And I'm like,
I don't believe
that's so mean that God, like,
You have to
Jesus
understand.
changed my whole story. No, when I'm in heaven, and I don't believe God is irrational, because he would be smarter than every one of us to be able to literally create everything. I would be like, God, I don't like, why would you tell that dude to kill his son?
I don't see any benefit in killing
like
your
what-
own kid.
And then
I think-
right at the last second, he's like, no, it's cool. I was just testing your faith in you. It's like, that seems psychologically, to me, when God's like, kill your own son, but then at the last minute,
So this,
don't do it. Oh man, you
Amen.
proved your faith to me. I would be like,
Right.
God, isn't there like I don't feel like you need to do that to a person. I don't think that's such a beautiful story. And I'm talking as a Christian. There's a lot of things with the Old Testament
Oh yeah.
I struggle with, but it doesn't change my overarching beliefs. And I think there is things that are written in,
Yeah.
maybe misinterpreted, that aren't as important as the bigger things, like the crucifixion and stuff of Jesus. Like, I'm hoping to God that your methodology of proving that is right compared to Billy's in that specific scenario. But in some of these other things, like, I almost rather them be disproved that God killed his that God and I've heard a lot of these different answers and stuff, and I know God gave us free will, and I understand all that too, but it's just like the God of the Old Testament and Jesus, it's hard to believe that they're the same person.
Yeah, sorry, I cut out quite a bit there, and so I think I missed a
And
large
I'm
portion,
not-
so
yeah,
I
you're
apologize for
talking off
that.
West, and I'm just
I might say a lot of stuff that I want to say. Go ahead.
I'll show
Yeah, so let me just say this. So the most quoted verse of the Bible in the Bible is a version of Exodus 34:6, which fundamentally describes who God is, that he's compassionate and loving, full of grace and mercy, and abounding in steadfast love.
Amen.
And so, in fact, if you read the book of Jonah, the beef that Jonah has with God, the reason why he doesn't want to go to Nineveh, is because he believes that God is so loving that if he tells the Ninevites
turn
to
and repent.
and they repent, God is
He
going to
will.
forgive them.
Wait,
So fundamentally,
what?
we have the picture of God consistently throughout the Bible, both in the Old and New Testaments, as being a God who is rich in love and mercy and abounding in steadfast kindness.
What is that?
And so we want a God who is just. And just to speak very briefly to the slavery issue, I mean, Leviticus 25 condemns by death the man stealing. So stealing someone and selling them into slavery. And the fact that the 10 Commandments are prefaced with, you are a nation who was slaves. You know, I'm the God of Israel who brought you out of
Don't
Egypt.
do that anymore.
So there's a fundamental difference, and there's lots
can't
of
do that.
literature on this. I would encourage people to read my friend Paul Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster? He's written some excellent stuff. He's also written on Did God Command Genocide in the Old Testament? He's a leading expert in the field of comparative analysis of ancient Near Eastern war literature. And so there are very coherent explanations for these things, and that slavery within ancient Israel was very, very different from what slavery around the ancient Near East was like. And on top of that, once again, when abolition movements happen, what's that? Sorry, brother?
I said slavery continued on throughout the Bible with no problem.
But it was always undergirded by the fact that this was not the ideal, that this was something that should not be done. And even slavery within ancient Israel was fundamentally different than slavery around the ancient Near East. This is not a contested fact. You can look at the scholarship of individuals like Wright, who's written extensively on this. He's an ancient Near Eastern ethicist, and there's vast difference between the law codes in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, and something like the Code of Hammurabi, which puts people on a tier system and gives different punishments depending on where they are within society. That's not true in ancient Israel. If you were a king and you stole somebody and you sold them into slavery, they would punish you by death.
But you
That-
steal somebody else's slave. You can't steal somebody else's slave. That's not a good thing to do, right? The point that I'm making here, I got to say something before I get out of here, is the Bible is full of contradictions. The biggest problem that we have is we're dealing with a civilization on this planet that is psychologically impaired. Human beings are psychologically impaired. This entire planet. We're living on an insane asylum. Earth is an absolute insane asylum. Mental illness has spread throughout the planet Earth like a complete virus. And when you take a text like the biblical text, knowing that human beings globally are mentally ill, this entire planet is a mental insane asylum, and I'm talking everyone. All 8 billion, whatever number of people we have now, are all mentally ill. And what I mean is there's different levels of mentally ill. We all have trauma that we're not dealing with. We all have internal issues. We all have situations that the shadow work that needs to be done. And some people are at higher levels of mental illness than others. Most of us are functional mental illness people. But when you take a look at the biblical text and you start going through this information, and it's the way that it's laid out, it becomes a proponent of more divide and conquer tactics. It becomes a proponent of racism. It becomes a proponent of slavery. It becomes a proponent of all these things that are dark and ill, including murder and killing in the name of God, which has been done how many millions of times. So my thing about the biblical text is it actually authored by the creator of the universe, or is it authored by the dark forces of, maybe, if this Satan is real, Satan himself? And the reason why I say that is because all-knowing, all-loving God, omnipotent and omniscient, that is creating not only this universe, probably most likely multiple universes, because the creator never stops creating, especially with infinite power, is now at some point going to author a text that is going to allow human beings to misinterpret it and take it in his name and begin to slay people, torture people, and enslave people worldwide, to claim that you're chosen ones, to set up a state of chosen people, and then to even claim that you have chosen land, and to torture and kill even more people, women and children, in modern times, still going on to this very day. To me, that doesn't seem like a very intelligent being, especially a being that knows the beginning and the end. So if you know the beginning and the end, you have a certain level of foreknowledge. You have advanced knowledge that goes beyond. You know what's the ending before the end even occurs, so you set up everything for success. Why? Because a genius solves problems before they happen. And I'm going to drop the mic on that.
With some of that too, I think came back on. Yeah, there's old stuff that it's hard to comprehend, but the thing that continued to change my life was Jesus, and the core of it was love conquers all things. So yeah, go on. We can do a follow up.
I really appreciate it, Billy. Thanks so much for interacting.
So yeah, I would
and
hope it doesn't cut out a follow up on just out of my own curiosity, Wes, of these are things again, like Jesus has changed everything in my studies. I mean, I was young, I was in trouble, I was in jail at age 17. It changed my whole life, and everything Billy was just talking about. Yes, of course, we all know people are broken. It's Jesus that has helped me through, and all of us, we're never perfect, through my brokenness. And there's so much more love than so many people know. And it's unfortunate that some of this stuff has caused, people can pull something and there is
a lot of
anger, and
confusion.
there's
It's unfortunate that so
truth
much
to what he was
people,
just
some people are
at
saying
least
so much
talking about there when
confusion
you
going
were cutting
around.
off about the wars and everything
Maybe just
too.
let people talk.
And it's sad because that's
So sad.
not what Jesus is doing there for us. And for people that truly don't have, the Jesus I know in their life, I don't preach down on them like I'm better than you, or to me, it saddens me, to be honest, Wes, talking heart to heart, because I'm like, man, at the end of the day, I've had so many times, bro. I've had times, I'm telling you, my wife's Muslim, but it was a church that saved our marriage. We were separated. We've been married 18 years. Like 3 years into our marriage, we were separated, living separate, had our 2 kids. She was so lost, she literally found herself driving to a church as a Muslim. It just so happened at 11 a.m. There's too many coincidences in my own life that I can prove that she found, well, everyone listening to this, she found a person that happened to randomly be at church at 11 in the afternoon, and he just so happened to be the marriage counselor. And
No way.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Wes, very nice to meet you.
Joe, pleasure.
So I, like many people, was introduced to you because of the debate
Yeah.
that you had with Billy Carson.
Quote unquote.
It's one of those things where it's very unfortunate when people get caught with their pants down. And I'm not an expert in many things, but the things that I am an expert on, you could wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and ask me about those things, and I go, oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
this is what it is.
Yeah.
I know, like martial arts or comedy, I could tell you, I could give you an expert version of reality. It seems like he does not have that, and he
That's
is
such a
wonderful
charitable way to
talker,
say
and
that.
it's a lot of fun. I like watching his
Oh,
videos.
that's such a charitable-
I love all that ancient history stuff, and even the most ridiculous tinfoil hat aspects of ancient. It's fun.
It's entertainment.
But I know that there's a different, like Andrew Schultz and I had a discussion about this. Like he said when he had Billy on the podcast, he said, we're not going to fucking research anything. We're not going to search anything. We're not going to do anything. Just let him talk because it's fun.
Yeah.
Andrew's awesome. But when he was on with you, it was quite apparent that you are an actual expert in the Bible and in many religious texts, and that he didn't necessarily have the facts straight. So
Yeah.
what was the fallout of all of that?
Well, it's interesting you say the expert thing, because I literally was asked to do it 24 hours beforehand. So I had like the least amount of preparation
Right.
going into it, and I was okay with that because I'd
you were
listened
actual
to Billy
expert.
Carson. Well, and I listened to the stuff he'd said, so I knew enough about the ways that he'd articulated things about the ancient Near East and the Bible and Christianity to know enough that his level is pretty surface. But the fallout was that not only did he not want us to release the conversation, but then he started throwing out cease and desist letters, and then he started, trying to sue people. So, I mean, I was never worried because I'm a Canadian, and anybody who's tried to sue internationally knows that.
Good luck.
Yeah, right. Yeah. As far as I understand it, he would have had to file a claim in a Canadian court that would have been reviewed to have legal precedence. That he'd have to prove that he could win.
What was his argument?
Apart from the fact that he was embarrassed that he lost.
Well, yeah, that's not really an argument, right? We've all been there. You're hungover, thinking about all the dumb stuff you did last night and wondering if anybody remembers. Unfortunately, is that even, can you actually
No.
say?
No, you can't do it.
So what was does he have a lawyer that wrote the cease and desist? Is he a
Yeah.
lawyer?
No. So he actually, it's interesting because Mark Menard, who was the guy who hosted this interaction, he sent Mark a handwritten one, and then he eventually gave Mark an official one from his lawyer. So I actually was sent one by his lawyer, which I, screenshotted, posted publicly online, and said I'm going to ignore this. And then, but he sent Mark, who was the podcast host, as far as I'm aware, numerous cease and desists, and Anton, who was the media manager. He sent a number of cease and desists.
It's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
When you get caught with your pants down, you're supposed to say, I got caught with my pants down.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's doing, especially if you're public. Like, it's very clear you're incorrect.
Well, the irony of this situation is if he just kind of left it, he probably wouldn't have made anywhere close to the splash
No.
that it's made. And we told him that. We said, like, hey, Barbara Streisand effect is going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, you're a big enough personality that if I make a video and say, like, hey, I had this conversation, didn't go well for Billy, and Billy doesn't want it released, that's going to start to gain traction sooner or later.
Yeah. It's, the problem is to really delve into these subjects. It takes a tremendous amount of research, years and years and years of research. You really have to know what you're talking about. Most of us don't.
Well, and especially with languages.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't get into it. I hoped to have, in our initial conversation, kind of press him a little bit more on the more overt things he'd said about, like, Greek and Hebrew and Sumerian, because I've studied a number of ancient languages, and when you study the languages, you realize the complexities of these things. And so when someone hasn't, and they're making statements that are obviously indicative of someone who hasn't studied them, it's super apparent.
Right.
And so I think it's one thing to be making claims about, say, like Christian history or the Bible, but when you start to get into like linguistics and philology, it gets messy. And if you don't know what you're talking about, it gets really apparent really fast.
So the gentleman who brought the two of you together, what was his goal? Like, what was he trying to do, and how did he approach you?
Yeah, so he's friends, or I should say was friends. He was friends with Billy. They live in the same neighborhood.
Oh, boy.
So it's actually become really, it's become pretty rough for him. So he released a video yesterday, which I think people should go and check out, where he kind of gives his perspective. He's been friends with Billy for years. He was at Billy's wedding. Billy had 15 people at his wedding.
Oof.
Mark was one of them. And they live in this community in Florida. Their sons are friends. Their wives would hang out.
Oof.
And Mark told me, he's like, I've been hearing Billy say, he wants to debate, nobody will debate him for years. And so as far as I think Mark was concerned, he was giving Billy the opportunity that Billy had told a lot of people he wanted.
Right.
And so he, this was set up in that Mark and Billy have been talking. They've been on each other's podcasts in the past, and they've been friends, but more like business colleagues. Like, Mark has come out and said, I hadn't really gone into the stuff he'd said about Christianity or ancient religions or whatever that much. Mark is he's a Christian. He has like a public profession of faith, and him and Billy had talked about the fact that they wanted to talk about like faith stuff and some of their differences, and that that Mark was kind of prepping for this, and his media manager Anton had sent him some of my stuff and said, like, Wes has done some stuff on some things that Billy has talked about, and maybe you should look up some of this stuff, read into it. And Mark, very last minute, was like, well, I feel inadequate. Do you think I could just ask Wes? And so he DM'd me on Instagram and just kind of laid this out, like, hey, I'm gonna have Billy in my studio in 24 hours. I can tell him you're coming, I can tell him who you are, I can like give him your background, but would you be willing to come? And so that's what I did. And so that's how it got set up.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but was Billy aware that this was going to be a debate, or did he think it was going to be just a discussion? Like, what did he think it was going to be?
No, he'd been given all of the prerequisites. Like, he knew we're going to go over some of his stuff that he'd said about Christianity, that I was going to come in, who I was, what my name was, some of my background, and that part of the conversation was going to be me kind of asking him some clarifying questions and rebutting some of the things that he said. So you didn't watch the 3-hour live stream that they did you?
I watched chunks of it.
Okay.
I watched a little bit, I'm like, oof, and then I shut it off, and then I watched a little bit more, oof.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Billy there says he had no idea going in. And I mean, as Mark said in his video that he released yesterday, I mean, that's patently false. He knew what it was going to be, who was going to be involved, and even some of the things that we would be talking about.
Okay. And he also was claiming that it wasn't a debate, that he had been involved in debates before, and that he would prepare for debates, but this is something he didn't prepare. But again, it's like, if you ask me about things that I know about,
Yeah.
you can wake me up
Yeah.
out of a full sleep and give me a couple seconds. I'll go, oh, okay, this is what it is.
Yeah.
If you know, you know.
And
you
it
know?
wasn't a debate in one sense. Like, it wasn't. Like, we
Right.
didn't do, opening statements and
Right.
cross-examination
Right.
and rebuttal.
Right.
It really was a conversation.
Right.
And it only kind of turned into a debate in the sense that Billy, I think, got caught out. And so the things that were talked about kind of showed that, that he needed to go on the offense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's all very unfortunate, but the good part of it is I was introduced to you and your work. And
There you
it's
go.
Very, very extensive and very fascinating. And the
Amen.
videos that you sent me on Instagram, I watched both of those today as well.
Awesome.
So really, really interesting stuff. And your knowledge of the history of the biblical texts and Codex Sinaiticus and all these different things. Very, very fascinating stuff. So let's just get into your background. Like, how did you get started in your research, and how did you get into this?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were missionaries. So I was born in Pakistan and spent a portion of my childhood in the Middle East with my parents working in Amman, Jordan. And then we came back from the Middle East when I was pretty young. And so I grew up in this very diverse home in the sense that my mom was a missionary kid who grew up in India. And so we had a lot of worldview kind of perspectives represented in our home. Like I often say, we had the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon and the Quran
Really?
on the shelf.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, and I think, that always, although my parents were never overt with this kind of stuff, they always had the perspective that, we're Christians. We believe that this worldview perspective is true, but hey, this stuff isn't scary. This stuff isn't, off limits. We can investigate these things. And they never said that outright, but that I always felt this kind of attitude of that kind of perspective. And, having been exposed in majority Muslim contexts and seeing that kind of stuff, and my mom having a pretty good knowledge growing up in India of things like Hinduism and Sikhism and that. I don't know how much of the kind of testimony stuff you watched of mine, but just before my 12th birthday, I actually was diagnosed with a neurological condition that left me paralyzed from the waist
Yeah,
down.
I did see all that.
Yeah. So that's a condition that's called acute transverse myelitis, which I often say is a word you can forget as soon as you hear it, because it's a complicated one. But what happened was that I had the flu, and my body's immune system attacked the nerve endings at the base of my spinal cord and caused swelling and cut off the communication between my brain and my legs. And
Instantaneously, right?
yeah, basically, I'd gone down for a nap. I was camping out in the bathroom floor for flu reasons. And when I woke up, about 30 minutes later, I couldn't feel my legs. And so, yeah, that's the acute part of the acute transverse myelitis, was that it was basically instantaneous. And that's what made the diagnosis as severe as it was. Like they said, there's a 30% chance. It was like a small percentage of probability that I would recover, but a much higher percentage that there would be a lot of either complete paralysis for the rest of my life, or some kind of issues with walking. It's related to diseases like multiple sclerosis, in that it's neurological and it affects that kind of thing. And 1 month from the day that I woke up and couldn't feel my legs, I woke up on Saturday morning, got out of bed, walked over to my wheelchair and sat down.
1 month.
1 month, yeah. January 8th to February 8th, exactly.
Very fortunate.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What treatment did they give you?
So initially they gave me steroids to reduce the swelling, but so I spent 11 days in the hospital being overseen by pediatric neurologists and specialists in this because it's a very rare condition. And so they were studying me, and they gave me steroids, and they did some other tests, but really, there was no true kind of treatment in that. So I was doing physiotherapy. I would be pulled out of gym class in school, but it was a little bit of a joke. Like, can you move your legs? You know, can you? It was.
Could you move anything?
No, nothing.
Could you feel anything?
No. In fact, when I was in the hospital, I'd wake up and there'd be pinpricks in my legs, because they'd be testing where the reactions were, and they'd have used a syringe. And so I'd wake up and there'd be these tiny little pinpricks in my legs, because they'd been testing while I was asleep to see what the kind of, whether it was registering neurologically with anything. But I couldn't feel anything. I was fully a paraplegic. Yeah, but going back to that, so I experienced this, what I consider to be a true supernatural experience, in that I walked into the hospital to the doctors that had overseen me, and they were the first ones that used the word miracle. They said, we really don't have any type of medical explanation, and mainly because there was no atrophy. Because of the cutoff of the communication, my muscles in those 30 days were fine. And it's a short amount of time, but they said there should be something, and we're picking up nothing.
That's crazy, because I've broken limbs before and had them in casts, and just in the 6 weeks that you have a cast on,
Yeah.
you have massive atrophy.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was the kind of predication for them using the word miracle. And so that's kind of, it marks this, what I do consider to be like this supernatural, something happened. But
Did you feel like that was like a calling that led you to a very specific mindset after that?
it's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, as much as you could at 12 years old.
Right. But it must have had a significant impact on your psyche and your perceptions.
Yeah, well, it definitely led to things like later in life, I got very involved in athletics, in track and field. And part of that was feeling a conviction that I knew what it was like to not be able to wake up and walk out of the room.
Right.
And so taking that pretty seriously and competing competitively well into university. Because even though, I wasn't the most naturally talented individual on the team, I felt like a motivation to be able to, I don't want to waste this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then
That's
later
a
on, in
lot
terms of your
around
original question, the difference in that was that I realized, okay, there's something out there, something happened that I can't totally explain on naturalistic terms. But how do we go from that to saying, okay, well then this worldview is correct? And so, despite being raised in a Christian home, I felt like my parents telling me what was true is not the worst reason to believe it, but it's also not the best. And so as a teenager, I did a lot of kind of soul searching. And like I said, I was able to do that to a certain level of degree because of the openness within my household, where I pulled the Quran off the shelf and I read it, front to back, just trying to figure out, okay, what's going on here? What's all this about?
Right.
And it was through that period of searching, and it wasn't a crisis of faith. That would be an over-exaggerated term. But it was kind
An
of
inspiration of faith, perhaps.
maybe, yeah, digging through. Okay, well, what do these guys believe?
Right.
What is this perspective hold?
Right.
And that was about a period of about a year and a half. And at the end of that, I did truly feel that, okay, well, I think in the ways that in my limited ability as a teenager, to investigate these things, I think that Christianity is true. But it wasn't until I went to university where I was engaging with people of other faith perspectives in Toronto.
I mean, I gotta
at
wait
York
anyway.
University,
I might as well put
where
more
I was
logs on
talking
that
to Muslims, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and atheists, from the gamut.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having these conversations, and I was expressing kind of my perspective on what I believed. And they would say things like, well, that sounds great, Wes, but, that's all the Bible. You can't trust that. And so that's where I started to take
Did Mormons say that to you?
Well,
'Cause
yes.
that's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, in the sense that
The Mormon one is the craziest one.
Yeah,
because we know who wrote it. You know,
Yeah.
and he's a shady dude.
he is a shady dude. Well, no, they did in the sense that the Book of Mormon trumps the Bible. So they would believe, I think it's the 10th article of the Mormon Church, is that they believe the Bible insofar as it is translated. And so they have this perspective that there's been things that have been affected. I mean, Joseph Smith made his own translation of the Bible. And it's rough.
And when he was 14.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it was later on that he made the Joseph Smith translation.
Oh,
But
really?
I don't even know if the official LDS Church ascribes to the Joseph Smith translation, because I think they even see this is, we know what the Greek and the Hebrew looks like, and this is not even. Yeah.
Well, he was, legitimate con man.
Can't wait here.
You know,
I gotta
which is
fish. I gotta
fascinating.
get
That
eat.
it's-
Even get
people
food
have
ready.
such a deep
After a
search
storm
for
of mouth.
meaning and truth that if you are confident,
Mm-hmm.
and which is what a con man is, confidence man. If you are really good at expressing yourself
Mm-hmm.
and really you show confidence in your convictions, you can persuade a lot of people.
Yeah. Confidence is not competency.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those
Right.
things get confused a lot.
Well, it covers up for competency sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In religion and politics and
Yeah.
all sorts of things, right?
In everything.
Yeah.
In everything. I mean, I think because people want to, it's very difficult to be an expert in a
Some
subject.
worms.
And I think people want to believe that they are, and they don't want to do the work.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's why, experts themselves feel a lot of inadequacy, is because
Sure.
they study a subject and realize, I'm never going to get to the bottom of this hole.
Right.
So,
Most
unfortunately,
subjects are very, very nuanced and very deep.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about ancient religion.
yeah.
I mean, you're talking about things that were a oral tradition for a long time before they were even written down.
Mhm.
So it's a long trudge to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah. And part of the whole, what I was trying to get Billy in that conversation that I had with him to get to the bottom of, partly was a question of methodology. I think he got frustrated at me at one point because I kept asking, what are the criteria that you're using when you're looking at one source versus another source and coming up with a conclusion? Because in historiography, it's the inference to the best explanation. And so there are different ways that you go about that, different methodologies. And historians very rarely disagree on the data and the evidence. It's the conclusions that you draw from it. But then there are some things that are just out and out false. And I don't think Billy totally knew what I was talking about, but it's those criteria that we look at when we look at something that does come from an oral tradition and eventually gets written down and becomes a literary text. And then you analyze that on the basis of it being a literary text.
This is sort of the problem between with being self-taught rather than conventionally academically trained.
Definitely.
Where you're trained in very specific disciplines and you're taught to understand the foundation before you understand how to put a window in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you have to know from the base, from the beginning. Do you have a water line? Do you have power? There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things going on when you're trying to construct an expertise in something, especially something that is so complicated. And one of the things that I've gotten out of, I've probably watched 20 hours of your stuff over the last couple of weeks. And you've spent a lot of time on this. This is not a casual, cursory examination of these texts and of religion. This is a long, long journey. That's what's particularly exceptional and really interesting to me, because I'm always fascinated by people that have really gone down the road, really, really, really gone down the road, because you don't meet a whole lot of them. I know a lot of Christians that can quote you some versions of the New Testament, some Psalms, but the real, the go all the way to the max, way. And that's what you've done. That's very interesting. So this is like, how old are you?
33.
Which is very young for someone who
Spring
has
chicken.
the depth of knowledge that you have. You know, so you've been doing this essentially from that miraculous moment. That ignited this spark, even though you came from a missionary background, and then from then on. So for the past 11 years, 12 years, or 20 years, 30 years, so it's your whole life essentially. It's all been this.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, I went to university with full intention of going into the police force. I did like my undergraduate studies, and then I kind of mapped out this plan that I was going to become a police detective, and that was my goal. And I think I realized
Why not? Because you like getting to the bottom of things?
It could be.
Because you do.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
When someone who spends 21 years like getting to the bottom of a religion, you know, you'd probably be pretty good at cracking the code.
I hope so. I think that might have been part of it. I also, there was an aspect of when I was in high school where they were like, you got to figure out what you're doing, or you're going to be homeless and you're going to die.
Yeah,
like
I remember that part.
I felt that like
it was a
that
terrifying
pressure.
moment in life.
Man, I always tell people when they're in high school, like, you can chill out. Like, it's going to be okay.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? I wonder if it's different now
I
because
think you should have a certain amount of desperation. Because I think that it ignites a fire within you to do something.
there's probably something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The people that I know that have been too pampered and taken care of and didn't have a fear of everything going completely sideways, they never really get the momentum that's necessary to accomplish things in life.
Yeah, there's probably something to that. I mean,
Yeah. A
desperation.
little desperation and fear, I think, is good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody wants to be comfortable. I don't think that's necessarily a good path. I mean, I think you should have perspective and you should enjoy your life as a young person and have those moments. But you should also realize you got work to do.
Well, and stress is good, right? Stress creates perseverance
Yeah.
and creates patterns that allow you to succeed.
Yes.
I mean, this is like athletics 101, right?
I think that's very important.
You got to push yourself. And I think actually part of that also led in, like, I'm a big believer in athletic discipline needs to go hand in hand. I mean, I know you are too. Needs to go hand in hand with any other type of, like, whether it's an intellectual endeavor or, like, because it trains you to be able to go into places that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that uncomfortability allows you to then become stronger. You know, realize where your inadequacies are. And especially when you're with people who are better than you. I mean, when I was running at York University, there were two guys on our team who, because I was okay individually, but I ran for the relay team. Yes, I was a sprinter. And one of the guys was part of the, they medaled, when Canada medaled at Worlds, he was part of that relay team. And then my other training partner, Busy, who, he ended up competing in Tokyo for Canada. And when you're beside someone who is like just a genetic freak, you're like, oh, okay. Like, that's different.
Yeah.
Right? And it both pushes you, but it also reveals your limitations. Where that doesn't inhibit you, like, you shouldn't, that shouldn't discourage you to go up to that line of being able to push yourself. But at the exact same time, it creates a realism that, like, I'm never gonna, I can train as much as I want to, I'm not gonna run like that, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but going back to what you were asking, like, I think there was part of that in wanting to go into the police force, but then realizing, like, around my third year of university, that my passions and motivations were very, very different, and that I didn't know how to go about that, where the proper place to do that was, but I knew that I needed to do that to some degree, particularly with the Bible, because I was claiming that this Bible talks about this guy Jesus, and I'm a Christian. So I have a friend, Addy Bannister. He's out in the UK, and he says if you take Christ out of Christian, all you're left with is Ian. And Ian's a great guy. He's not going to save you from your sins. And so, like, if I'm wrong about the Bible, those people who push back on me, right, those skeptics of various worldviews, if the things they were saying about the Bible were true, then it did actually legitimately undermine what I believe. And so I needed to take that seriously. I had an obligation to actually investigate those things as far as
Playoffs. We're talking about playoffs. You bet we are. Get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is key to winning the playoffs, and you can score big by betting on them at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score 6. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code ROGAN. That's code ROGAN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
What is the oldest version of the Bible or the stories in the Bible? Is it the Dead Sea Scrolls or are there older versions?
The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest of the Old Testament. So when they were discovered, so they were discovered in 1946 to 1957. And at that point, during their discovery, they pushed back a lot of our previous oldest manuscripts 1,000 years, which was a big deal.
How old are they?
They're anywhere between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century BC. So it's kind of tricky because the Dead Sea Scrolls they're like a library that we refer to. So it's approximately 970 documents, but it's distributed out between 10,000 and 11,000 fragments. So there's a lot going on there, right? So, and some of these, are so fragmentary that you look at them and it's like confetti. Because they're, 3,000 years old, but not quite that. They're like 2,000 plus years old.
Animal skins too, right?
Yeah, well, all sorts of things. Animal skins, papyri, and then some of them are actually done on copper.
Really?
They're like inscribed in copper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one of the coolest ones. Actually, this relates because I know you're a Marco Allegro guy. The first time I was introduced to Marco Allegro was not his Sacred Mushroom and the Cross stuff, but he published a book on what's called the Copper Scroll, because part of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments is this inscribed document on copper, which is an ancient treasure map.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Online?
Yeah, Jamie, pull up the, hey.
There it is. Wow.
Yeah. So it's in Hebrew, and it is wild. So it has these sites where it says buried treasure is found.
Whoa.
And there have been a number of guys who have tried to look for it. And so
Does it say what the treasure is?
you know what? Off the top of my head, I don't know. But
Look how crazy that language is.
I know, right? And so, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, so it's like stuff like this. It's papyri, it's animal skins, and it's a number of different languages. So the vast majority of it is in Hebrew, but there's also a lot in Aramaic, and then Greek, and in Nabatean. So it's like an umbrella term to just describe a whole bunch of literature. So a lot of it is biblical because it was written by this group out in the desert called the Essenes, who lived at Qumran. So, but then other stuff of it is just, it's just Jewish literature of various stripes that were hidden in caves all around the Dead Sea.
So the scrolls, as it were, aren't all biblical. Some of them is just a accounting of the times.
Yeah. Oh, Jamie, look at that. 65 tons of gold and 26 tons of silver.
65 tons. That's a lot. How many Cuban links can you make out of that?
You can see why someone would try to track that down.
Boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, like you have ones like the Great Isaiah Scroll, which is fully complete. Like it's a copy of the book of Isaiah, and it's a full complete scroll. But then other ones are so fragmentary that we think they're written in Hebrew, but we can't actually tell.
Oh wow.
Because no one's willing to piece these, and this is true for a lot of stuff. So the largest grouping of papyri literature in the world is the Oxyrhynchus collection, which we get a good portion of our oldest manuscripts of the New Testament from. But if you go to Oxford and you look at the Oxyrhynchus collection, and you pull out that drawer, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And you're like most of it is untranslated, untranscribed, because the amount of man hours that it would just take to even put it together, never mind then go to the effort of transcribing and translating it. Most people are not willing to do that.
And if you're missing chunks, how do you even make that puzzle connect?
Well, that's part of my area of speciality in research is in regards to that. So I study paratextual features. We're really gonna get nerdy today. So you look at the features of the manuscripts, not necessarily the words, but things like the spaces between the words, the development of punctuation, indentation or outdentation, and I look at the margins, and I try to, based on the average size of manuscripts in and around that time, and also the average spacing of words and the margins on top, bottom, and the side, recreate what the manuscript could have possibly looked like.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So when you say the book of Isaiah is intact, how similar is it to the book of Isaiah that's in the Bible?
So that one is fascinating. So this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but when we discovered the Great Isaiah Scroll, previous to that, the earliest copy of Isaiah that we had was in the Masoretic Text, which is in the Middle Ages. Yeah, so it was literally 1,000 years. We literally pushed back our understanding of Isaiah 1,000 years. And the thing that really shocked scholars, like I said, this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but one of the things that shocked them about Isaiah was that it was word for word identical to the Masoretic text.
Word for word.
Yeah. So this is
right
the
there?
Great Isaiah Scroll. So if you go to Israel and you
Wait,
go
is that papyrus?
yes. No, I think that one's so I should be more specific. So is animal skin. Vellum can be used synonymously with the term parchment. Technically, parchment is like baby animal skin, like calves or lambs. But this is the Great Isaiah Scroll, and you can see like they stitch together the parchment because it's so long.
God, it's so beautiful. The way they wrote back then was so beautiful. I mean, maybe it's because I can't read it, that it's so fat. Maybe if I saw English, I would think that's beautiful too.
Yeah.
Especially script, like cursive. Cursive is very beautiful. But that is so fascinating because obviously coming from a point of ignorance, the letters look so similar. Like so many of, this is the what I always got about cuneiform. When I look at that, I'm like, it's just one particular sort of character that's this way and that way and up and down and...
Oh, cuneiform is wild.
Weird.
It's really, really tricky. And that's the thing when, like, if you're studying ancient languages and you start to study Greek, like, the Greek alphabet is similar enough that you're like, okay, alpha looks like an A, right? Delta looks like a D. So you can figure it out. And so it tricks you because you start off and you're like, oh, this is phobios, fear. I know what a phobia is. And you get this false sense of encouragement. And then, the further you go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh, I'm screwed. So, but Hebrew is completely the opposite because the writing system is so different. The learning curve is hard at the beginning, and then you're like, everything is just 3 letters with a suffix added to it. And so it feels like, whereas the opposite is true with Greek. Greek, you're like, I get this. And then when you really go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh crap, none of the things that I learned about that are supposed to be standard, all of them have exceptions.
Wow.
But cuneiform's a wild one.
Do you know who Rick Strassman is?
No.
He's a scholar, and he did a lot of early work, FDA-approved work on psychedelics. And he spent 16 years teaching himself to read ancient Hebrew.
Nice.
Yeah, so because he wanted to really understand the Bible from the original source of ancient Hebrew and to understand it in context. Because ancient Hebrew, the way the words are structured, is so different than English, and that something must be lost in translation. So he spent 16 years teaching himself how to read ancient Hebrew. I was like, that is that is such dedication. 16 years.
It's a long time. That seems too long.
Well, you're self-taught. I mean, he's doing it himself.
Yeah. Self-teaching. Yeah. I self-taught myself Greek at first, and then when I started learning it formally, I realized how much you miss when you self-teach yourself.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, how many people can teach you ancient Hebrew? How many courses are available?
Oh, you can take it at any graduate college.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And is it, it's not something that we know what it sounded like, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big debate with ancient languages.
Right.
Like, same thing with, arguably, we don't know how any of this was pronounced.
Right.
I mean, modern Greek speakers get really mad at me when I say that because they're like, of course we know how it's pronounced. It's pronounced like we pronounce it, right? And on all my videos where I'm like site translating Greek manuscripts, there's so many comments of modern Greek speakers getting mad at how I'm pronouncing things. But realistically, we don't really know how most of the things are pronounced with anything.
But isn't that very bizarre when you're like if you go back to, like, say, the Epic of Gilgamesh? We don't even know what the words sounded like.
Yeah.
We kind of know what they represent, and then we do a literal translation of what they represent. But if you've never heard, no one can speak ancient Sumerian.
Yeah. Well, Sumerian's a wild one
Yeah.
because it's a language isolate.
What does that mean?
So Hebrew is an Afro-Semitic language. So Hebrew is related to all of these other languages like Aramaic and Akkadian, but language isolates have no adjacent comparisons.
Whoa.
So, because I tried to teach myself Sumerian and I failed and I just gave up because I couldn't do it because I had nothing to really compare it to.
Right.
So Sumeriologists are very they're a field of their own because I learned a little bit of Akkadian because I had studied Semitic languages, and there's enough crossover between things like Hebrew and Aramaic and Akkadian, but Sumerian you have nothing to compare it to. And
What did it eventually become?
it just died.
It just died.
It just died.
How? Do we know?
I mean, the Sumerians lost to the Assyrians, and the Assyrians got taken over by the Babylonians. I mean, it's just the course of history where things happen. But there are a number of ancient languages that are language isolates, like Linear Elamite. We had no idea what Linear Elamite even said until 2021.
Well, I never even heard it until 5 seconds ago.
I know. There you go, Jamie. If you pull up, if you look up, what's it called? There's a cup, a silver cup. It'll come up if you Google image Linear Elamite, because you think cuneiform looks wild. Linear Elamite is completely different than that too, and there's a silver cup which we had no idea what it said, and then a bunch of researchers, ancient Near Eastern researchers, developed. Well, so let's in the corner there, that one on
Far left corner?
Oh no, here now it's moved because you clicked it. That one, yeah, click that. So that's Linear Elamite. And so that's in and around the same time that languages like Sumerian. So there's this very interesting kind of, if we're talking about a story in the Bible like the Tower of Babel, where it says that God confused their languages and everybody started speaking different languages, you have these languages that just pop up and out of nowhere and have no relation to one another. So Akkadian starts to adopt certain words in Sumerian, but they're still Sumerian words. It's like pizza is Italian, right? Or like kayak is Inuit. But when you're looking at the words that carry over, it's not because there's a relationship between Akkadian and Sumerian. It's because you have these cultures that live side by side, and eventually Akkadian starts to adopt these things. But Sumerian is, so that's why when I see people like Billy Carson talk about being able to read Sumerian, I'm like, dude, I read ancient languages and I can't. I've tried and I can't make heads or tails of Sumerian.
Yeah.
So
That's a tell.
Unfortunately, it kind of gives away.
Listen, I like Billy. He was a nice guy. I really enjoyed talking to him. I really do. I think his videos are fun. But I also think truth is important.
I have no problem with him as an individual.
He just needs to course correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, course correct and recognize what you know and what you don't know. And that you're not doing people a service, especially people like myself that aren't educated in this. Like we turn to others who claim to have vast knowledge of this to help me out. Tell me what's going on. When I sit down and talk to you, tell me what's going on. And if you don't really know, you're fucking over a lot of people, unfortunately, for
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
This how do you say it again?
Linear.
Linear
Elamite.
Can you put that back up again, Jamie? So this was in 20. Can you show me that image that you'd showed me before?
Actually, see if you can find the
That's
cup.
pretty dope right
If you
there.
scroll, there should be a cup. I think it's called the dash.
Is that it in the lower corner? It's not the cup?
No. If you guys, it's got. Yeah, if you look up cup, yeah, that guy. So see that inscription at the top beside the face.
Yeah.
So that's the one. So it goes around the top of the cup, and they cracked that.
Look at that dude's honker.
He's got a big nose, isn't he?
That's a hell of a nose.
Yeah, he can smell that linear element. And so actually, interestingly enough, if you pull back, Jamie, that's my so there's an infographic that I made that just popped up. So if you click that
Right
guy,
there?
that's the one I made. Why is it coming up like that? Oh, okay.
So is it just bad resolution? Is that what you're saying? Oh, there it is.
Oh no, this is mine.
That's
So
just- okay.
so actually, here I'll be self-serving. If you go to wesleyhuff.com,
That is so, can we just look at that for a second? That is so cool. And how old is this?
20th century BC. Yeah.
So 4,000 plus years ago.
Yeah. So if you go, Jamie, to wesleyhuff.com and then click my infographics tab at the top. So I started making these things for the graduate students I was teaching. And yeah, so if you go down, there should be an archaeology section. And in the archaeology section, I have that one on, blanking on what is called. I make ones for manuscripts.
What a great website.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate
This
that.
is awesome. It's so deep.
Yeah, so there's a linear Elamite one.
What a fucking phenomenal resource this is.
Right there.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, Marv Dash. That's what it's called. So yeah, you see this. So I have Sumerian, Linear, Elamite, Akkadian, and Paleo-Hebrew there at the bottom, the comparisons. And these are languages that operated like alongside one another, but are almost completely foreign to one another. So there is crossover between Akkadian and Paleo-Hebrew.
So that's interesting. Sumerian, when I'm thinking of cuneiform, I'm not thinking of that, right? That looks different than some of like the clay scrolls, the imprintations that they make with a clay wheel.
Yeah, well, it's all done with the stylus. So it's like a little wedge stylus. So there are different variations of it, but ultimately it's done with the stylus. The thing that's interesting, like you're probably thinking more of what that later Akkadian looks like, right? Where it's like
Yes.
the wedges.
Yeah.
So they Akkadian basically borrowed the writing system, and it had development over time, but it was very
So when they
close.
conquered them, did they have their own writing system initially and just incorporated Sumerian writing to theirs?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But
God, I'd like to know.
I know, right?
I mean, it's so long ago, but not, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so long ago in terms of a human life,
Yeah.
but it's not that long. You think, like, we went from 4,000 years ago to that to large language models.
Yeah. That's
And,
pretty crazy.
Yeah, quantum computing.
Yeah. Well, even if you look at language systems develop. Paleo-Hebrew turns into what we saw in the Dead Sea Scrolls, whereas Paleo-Hebrew is a little bit different than what we eventually see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there's like a development within the language, and then modern Hebrew adopts the Hebrew in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but modern Hebrew has it has vowels that were developed in the Middle Ages to figure out how to pronounce it. Because basically, ancient Hebrew doesn't have a vowel system in its writing that's overly comprehensive. And so in the Middle Ages, when you have these groups of Jews who are copying these Hebrew scriptures, who aren't speaking it as much as they're reading it, you got to figure out how to pronounce it, because vowels make a difference. But if you took all the vowels out of English, if you were a natural English reader, you could probably figure out what was what if you're looking at the page. And so in the Middle Ages, the Masoretic scribes come up with these vowel pointing systems, and that's what you see when you look at a Hebrew Bible today, is you see these vowels. And sometimes the introduction or removal of the vowel is significant in the changing of words.
It's also interesting, and we're kind of seeing language change, written language, while right now in this current era because we've kind of abandoned cursive.
Yeah.
Right? So if people in the future go to read ancient scripts of human beings that lived in the 20th century, they'll be like, what is this shit?
Yeah.
And then, if there wasn't a lot of it, like there's no cursive on the internet. I mean, there's cursive on the internet, but I mean, no websites are written in cursive, or
Yeah,
very
it's all
few
printed.
at least. It's all printed.
Yeah.
And so they've essentially, in school, stopped teaching. Most classes don't teach cursive. Like, we all learned cursive as children. It was the way you could write things quicker.
Yeah.
And then once printing and typewriters and computers became ubiquitous, like, it's gone.
Yeah.
And everybody's just texting.
Yeah. Well, let's
Yeah.
hope people in the future are still able to read the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
Like, because that's what it was written in, right? Stuff like
yeah,
that.
that's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because if you were not taught that, and then
Uh-huh.
you went to read that, you said, this is English. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I recognize a few of these letters, but it's so vastly different than the printed text.
Yeah. Language models are wild.
Wild.
Yeah.
The whole thing is wild that people figured out how to associate sounds with little symbols, and then they did completely different shit in Korea, completely different shit in Russia.
Yeah.
Like, it's so fascinating. And then you have to have these experts who can translate these things, and you're dependent upon them forever, which that was what Lutheranism was all about, right? Like, Martin Luther wanted to have phonetic translations of the Bible, and there was a lot of resistance to that, because the people that knew how to read Latin were like, hey, slow down.
Yeah. Partly, I mean, there were proto-reformers before Luther. There were
they
guys
really?
like Wycliffe. So John Wycliffe and William Tyndale both translated the Bible, or parts of the Bible, into English, and they predated. I mean, and they weren't very popular for it either. I mean, Wycliffe was declared a heretic, and then his body was exhumed and burned because of the work that he did. But yeah,
Burned him after he was already dead.
yeah. Well, Tyndale's line was that he wanted, I believe it was Tyndale. It was either Wycliffe or Tyndale. My friends who are specialists in this are going to get mad at me for this. But one of those two guys said that they wanted the plowboy to be able to read the Bible and know it as well as the priest. And so that was their motivation, is that they're like, public education for literacy in these areas was largely because they just wanted people to read the Bible. But that was a big motivation behind Luther, was he's like, I'm going to translate this thing to German. Because part of his kind of kicking off of what we call the Protestant Reformation was that he read the Bible in Greek. Because there was a guy named Desiderius Erasmus who was they called them humanists, but it means something different than that. Humanists were like scholars who were trying to figure out the entirety of human knowledge up until that point. Like Renaissance men, kind of, right? So Desiderius Erasmus is like one of the last true Renaissance. But he was compiling, and he produced the first printed edition of the Greek New Testament. And so he comes out with this printed edition of the Greek New Testament, and Luther gets his hands on it. And so he's reading that, and he notices that in Matthew's Gospel, the word that's in the Latin is penitentium agite, do penance. In Greek is metanoite, which is repentance. And the church is using this as like, you need to do penance. You need to, do all of this stuff to show that you're sorry. And part of that was, paying the church. And Luther reads this and he goes, hey, guys, this means something different. This means repentance. It means changing your mind. It doesn't mean like to actually do things. And so part of his motivation is like, the Latin isn't reflecting, at least at the point that Latin had developed in that day. Like maybe when Jerome translates the Latin Vulgate back in the 4th century, and it's called the Vulgate because Vulgata means like regular. Like you think of vulgar, right? It's just the regular people language. Part of the reason was that in the 4th century, very few people were reading Greek. They were reading Latin. And so they're like, hey, Jerome, you need to produce a Bible in Latin because nobody can read the Bible anymore. And so he produces the Latin Vulgate, and ironically, by the time you get to Luther, 1,000 years later, no one can read Latin, and they're all using the Vulgate.
Wow, that is fascinating. Wow.
And even Erasmus was, so he dedicates his first few editions to the Pope because he knows that the Pope is going to get wind that he's producing Greek New Testaments, and the church is using the Latin, and he's risking his life. So if he dedicates it to the Pope, maybe the Pope will take it easy on him.
Did it work?
Yeah, it did.
Nice little flattery.
Yeah. See, it goes a long way.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? Is that you're dealing with these priests, you're dealing with human beings. And when human beings are the sole purveyors of truth, that it becomes a problem. It's power. It's too much power. Most people suck at power. They're just it just makes them drunk with it, and they abuse it. And you see that in many religions. You see that in cults.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, is the best example of it, because like when you know the person who created this thing, and you know this person is fucking insane, and you have a bunch of people that follow them.
They're just looking out for your best interest, Joe.
Yeah.
Right? They just want to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Did you see Wild Wild Country?
Oh, yes.
It's fucking awesome.
Unfortunately.
It's so good.
Oh,
It's
man.
so crazy. I mean, I'm so glad I wasn't there and a part of it, but they all look good in the beginning. That's what's really wild. All these cult documentaries, all these exposés in the beginning, like, these people haven't made. They're all eating together, and they have community, and they're praying together, and they seem
They're just seeking
wonderfully
enlightenment.
happy. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the ways my wife and I bond, we have very different tastes in movies, but there's enough crossover that our guilty pleasure is cult documentaries.
I love them.
They're so
I love
interesting.
them. I love them because there's something about people like absolutely believing things that's so appealing to me. I don't know why that is. Like, I like watching Islamic scholars speak, with like full confidence that their version of truth is truth. I'm just interested in that mindset. I think it's a very deeply cut groove in the human psyche that people can fall into. And when there's a cult, it's like, God, it's so obvious. Like, there's the guy. That's the guy. Here's a good example. There's a documentary called Holy Hell.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And you know that?
Yeah.
I bought the building that Holy Hell was, like, the actual theater that this guy had built. It's a beautiful theater that he had his followers build so he could dance in front of them. That was going to be the Comedy Mothership, the first version of it.
That's crazy.
So I was under contract for that building, but it fell apart. Thank baby Jesus. Thank somebody. Thank Allah. Thank somebody. And then we found this new place on 6th Street. But that documentary is so fascinating because you can see this guy who is a gay porn star and a hypnotist
So wild.
take a bunch of really lost people and send them down this crazy road, and then eventually it all falls apart.
You know what's interesting about that is I have less of a problem with the objective truth claims and more of a problem with them saying, but don't look into it. Like, don't test it. Like, what I say goes, and you're not allowed to explore it. Like, talking about the Mormon Church, they recently did this thing where they're like, you don't need to go on the internet, and you don't need to. And it's
Don't
like,
watch
guys,
the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, guys, I don't think you realize what you're sounding like when
Right.
you come across in that way.
Mormons are the nicest cult members. They're the nicest people. They really are so nice. I love them. I mean, Mormons that I've met have been so friendly. They're so family-oriented.
It's true.
It's like really easy to like think these are great people. I'll join them.
We know
Seems
why
like-
they're family oriented, right?
Why?
Is because in what Joseph Smith wrote, there's an idea that everybody's soul pre-exists, and you were born as a spirit child in a previous life, and the reason you need to have children is you need to bring those people's souls into existence. And so there's because you have a heavenly father and a heavenly mother, and you're all children of God in the actual physical sense, and that the pursuit is exaltation, where you will be a god on your own planet if
Right.
you've done everything right.
You get your own planet, which is
You
pretty
get your own
dope.
planet, and this is so Joseph Smith in the King's Follett Funeral Discourse. This is what he wrote. This is where he formulated this idea, where God, the Father, has a body as tangible as ours, of flesh and blood, and that he lived on another planet, and it was circled around the star called Kolob, and that if you do everything right, you will also be the god on your own planet. And so you got to encourage people to have kids because you're pulling those spirit babies out of the spiritual realm. But you're right; they're incredibly nice people.
The nicest.
The nicest.
Yeah, it's a really great cult. I mean, or religion, whatever. I mean, I used to have a joke in my act that a cult is is fake and it's made by one guy. That guy invented it. In a religion, that guy's dead.
There might be something to that.
Yeah, and some, for sure. But the question to me is always, what were they originally trying to do?
Right.
What was it based on? What in the beginning there was light? What is all of that?
Yeah.
What are those stories?
Yeah.
And when you take these stories and you are telling them for so long, that's why the book of Isaiah, what you were telling me, is so fascinating. That 1,000 years later,
Yeah.
you have the exact translation of this at a time where most people were illiterate. Right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's only really been recently that we have the levels of literacy that we have today. I mean, this is part of the reason why you have these long spans of time between, like, when people live and then the ancient biographies that start to pop up about them, is because most people are just illiterate.
But imagine how crazy that is. That something in a time where there's no printed press and something that had been passed on for so long as an oral tradition is exact word for word written.
pretty wild.
You find in a cave in Qumran.
Yeah.
And then the same thing you get in the English translation of the Bible today. That's nuts.
Yeah. I mean, up until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the New Testament manuscripts predated the Old Testament manuscripts by a long shot.
Really?
Yeah, because the Christians were less discerning in their proliferation of written documents. So the Jews had this whole system where you had to be a trained scribe, and they were very, very careful with the procedures that you went through. Whereas the Christians were like, we want to get this thing out as fast as we can, as often as we can, which had a lot of benefits in that, like, their goal was a proselytization and evangelism, and that worked. But the downside of it was that you get really messy copies, where you have copies all over the place, but human error gets involved, like spelling differences and additions, deletions, mostly for completely understandable reasons. But we actually have manuscripts where we know the person copied it and they didn't know how to read it because they make mistakes that you wouldn't make if you knew how to copy. There's this really great example of a guy who copies, I believe it's the genealogy of Matthew, and he's looking at a manuscript that has 2 columns, and he's copying it from left to right, and he's copying it like this, whereas it's like the column you go down and then the next column. So in the genealogy of Jesus, he's got all the wrong people begetting all the wrong people. And you're like, you wouldn't do this if you knew how to read, because God is in the middle of the genealogy. So like that kind of thing.
That is a real problem.
That is a real problem. But ironically, with the Christian manuscripts, because we have so many, it's actually because of the mistakes that we're able to trace the text back with a high degree of confidence. Because if you have copies that are floating around, North Africa and places like Egypt, and then you have copies in Syria, and you have copies out into Asia and into Europe and the British Isles, when mistakes pop up, they're geographically located. And because you have so many, you can compare and contrast them and figure out, okay, well, this obviously happened here at this time, and you can pinpoint those things. So this is a field called textual criticism, where we do this with all ancient documents. Like the Bible is a more kind of fleshed out field of textual criticism because we have so many manuscripts. But we do it with, Marcus Aurelius. We even do it with Shakespeare with the different copies. Because if you only have one copy, you have to trust that the person who copied that got it right.
Right.
Yeah. Which is the issue that we have for Beowulf. We only have one copy of Beowulf. And so we don't know what it looked like prior to that. So we just kind of accept that, okay, this is Beowulf. Like, there's no way to compare and contrast the tradition of the manuscripts of Beowulf.
God, when you're saying this about taking copied versions of it and comparing errors and going back, you're talking about so much time.
Yeah.
So much research.
It's legwork.
So much legwork.
Yeah. And fortunately, like, in the modern era, we get computers involved, and that cuts out a lot of the, just manpower.
I would like to see AI get to the bottom of all this.
Well, there's an interesting, so in Germany, at the Center for the Study of New Testament Research in Munster, it's called CBGM, the Coherence-Based Genealogical Method. And it's tracing not manuscripts, but readings within manuscripts and finding the relationships between the different ones by like computer models. And so they are actually so this is actually the way that like modern era textual criticism is being done, is with these language models that operate on tracing readings and how certain readings are related to one another, which has allowed us to do things like look at 4th century manuscripts and actually see that their readings come hundreds of years earlier in other manuscripts that we have in collections. So one of the clearest examples of this is there's a manuscript in the 4th century called Codex Vaticanus, because it happens to be in the Vatican right now. And there is a manuscript from the 2nd century which has the exact same scribal conventions that Codex Vaticanus does in particular readings. And so we know for a fact that the scribes who created Vaticanus did not have, I think it's P75, which is Papyrus 75, but they had some sort of collection of manuscripts that were similar. And so we can have confidence that the readings, although they're 4th century in particular areas of Codex Vaticanus, are actually 2nd century in their origination. And a large part of this is because of these like models that the computers got involved in.
Wow, that is so fascinating. Now, when they're going over things like ancient Sumerian and they're reading things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, like if we can't say, we don't know how to make those words, we don't know what they sounded like, how are they translating it into an English version? Like, when you, like, one of the things that's been compared quite a bit is the Epic of Gilgamesh and the story of the Great Flood.
Yeah.
There seems to be some parallels.
Yeah.
Like, how close is it?
In some ways it's very close, and in others it's not. So that's the story of Utnapishtim, which is kind of a side story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh he realizes his mortality and he's trying to find eternal life, and there's this guy Utnapishtim who he runs into, who tells him this story of the gods gifted him with eternal life because he saved all the animals on a boat. And so there are actually parallels between that and, say, the Genesis 6 Noah Ark story. In like making a big boat, putting all the animals on it, and then they get off and they make a sacrifice to, in his case, the gods, and in the Bible, God. And I think what you're looking at there is probably a cultural remembrance of something that did take place. And so you have these adjacent cultures who they're existing within this framework of the ancient Near East, and you're seeing these kind of parallel echoes of things that actually did happen. So there are definite parallels, but I think sometimes people look at those and they overplay that. So one of the examples I often give is Advil and arsenic both come in pill form and have an A on the bottom. But it's not the similarities that matter in that case, it's the differences. And so if you look at the differences, there are significant differences in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Utnapishtim story and the Genesis 6 story. If for no other reason than the Noah Ark story is a very small part of the book of Genesis. And the story of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh is a little bit more stretched out. It has more to do with the theme of what Gilgamesh is doing in his epic. So, but there are obviously parallels between that, because these are both ancient Near Eastern stories, and they're products of their day. In the same way that I think you see parallels between some of the New Testament Gospels and other ancient Greco-Roman biography, in that, you know, these are products of ancient history, and so they're going to look like other ancient historical writings that kind of parallel around that. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. It's just when you're talking about the oldest of old stories, it's always so interesting to wonder, like, when when they're taking these oral traditions, like Socrates is famous for saying that he didn't believe that you should write things.
Yeah.
Right,
Make people
because-
lazy.
Right, and make
Yeah.
you lazy. You need to learn how to remember things. You
Yeah.
need to exercise your memory, which is so fascinating when you think that there must have been people that were in charge of memorizing these oral traditions.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about, particularly if you're talking about the Old Testament, the series of writings, like these are long stories that someone had to remember and pass on to generations. So the thing with me was always like, well, what was the origin of all this? Like, what was the first version of it, and where the hell did it come from, and what was it? What was going on where these people felt like in this time of incredibly difficult survival, right? You're hunter-gatherers, right? We're talking about thousands of years ago. And these people took great time and made great effort to preserve these stories. And then there's always human error, right? There's human error, as you were saying, with transcription and trying to decipher things and writing things down where you don't really speak the language. You got to wonder, like, how much did we lose in this oral tradition? Like, what was the original story, and what were they trying to convey?
Yeah, and I think that there's an aspect of like a message that's trying to be communicated. I mean, we are modern people of the Enlightenment. So we almost have a perspective where we want something to be very like exhaustive, that ancient writers didn't have those same sort of conventions. Or so they're going to capitalize on certain ideas and concepts for the purpose of, when someone tells you a story, you don't memorize everything.
Right.
You go to university, you write notes, right? The people who are writing everything the professor is saying word for word, probably not the people who are going to remember what the professor says as well as the people who write down the main things. And when you write down the main things, the main points, without all of the other stuff that kind of is just, it's icing, then you get the main idea more. Ancient writers talk about this. So there's a guy named Quintilian who exists in the 1st century BC, and there's this series of writings that we call progymnasmata, which are basically like, how do you do good writing? So he's training people, maybe even individuals like Plutarch, who is one of the best known ancient biographers, and saying, like, it's just as important what you don't say as to what you do say. Because you don't want to, A, writing in the ancient world is expensive, really expensive, and B, you want to make sure that your audience is actually getting the message that you want to convey. And so this is something that when you read, like, German scholars, biblical scholars of the 19th and 20th century, or even prior to that, like 18th, 19th century, they look at the Gospels and they're like, this isn't biography, because it's not capitalizing on Jesus' childhood. We all know that good biographies tell about your childhood and psychologize and these sorts of things. Whereas if you look at some of these ancient writers who are talking about how you should write biography, they say, if there's nothing in their childhood that's that significant, don't write it. It's going to distract from, like, if there is something, say like Jesus' birth, or Luke tells a story when he's 12 of Jesus, when he goes with Mary and Joseph, and, you know, Mary and Joseph lose the Son of God, and they start going home without him, and they're like, where's Jesus? And they got to go back to Jerusalem. That's a significant story, and so it appears that Luke includes it because there's a significant reason to include that. But they wouldn't have had any problem with leaving out large portions of someone's life if it didn't contribute to what the ultimate goal of telling that person's life was.
I think what's important is we have to try, as difficult as it might be, to put our minds in the context of people who lived in a time where most people were illiterate, and you're telling these parables, you're telling these stories as an oral tradition, and that they have a different mindset in terms of the distribution of information.
Totally.
And what the significance of these things are.
Yeah. Yeah, these are documents, well, in terms of the Bible, like, as someone who identifies as a Christian, I would say that the Bible is written for you, but it wasn't written to you. it had a completely different original audience. But you should do your best at figuring out who it was written to and how that made a difference to them, because then the application is going to come out even clearer for you. And that should be ultimately, the goal of everyone who's looking at ancient documents. Who was the original audience? How would they have understood it?
Yeah.
Because you can read all sorts of things because of your modern conventions into what someone is talking about in the ancient world and completely bypass what they're actually trying to convey in their intention.
Yeah, and again, it's almost impossible to put your mind completely into the context of these people that were living then. It's almost impossible to imagine the way they viewed the world and the way they communicated. And when you're dealing with like really old stuff like the Sumerian text, and then people have translations of it which can be fantastical, like the Zechariah Sitchin stuff. It's like you have to be a scholar in ancient Sumerian and understand the origins of language, and you have to. And then still, there's massive debate. There's a whole website called SitchinIsWrong.com.
Yeah.
But he's the most fun.
He's fun. I'm not convinced he could read Sumerian either.
Really?
Yeah.
I think he was bullshitting.
I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt. He takes so many liberties with the stuff he's commenting on that I have a hard time getting my head around.
So if he couldn't read it, where would he be getting his translations?
From actual translation.
Okay, so he would take these translations and then make his own assumptions and his own interpretation. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think to a certain degree. I mean, even something like Nibiru is not a Sumerian; it's an Akkadian. But he makes a big deal about it being related to Sumerian, and it is a word that appears within Akkadian.
And Akkadian is what time period?
Akkadian is just after. So it exists kind of in a crossover where Sumerian predates Akkadian, but Akkadian develops alongside. And then, as cultures like the Assyrians come into power and kind of subvert the Sumerians.
So, so oldest Sumerian writing is what? What's the oldest timeline?
Like
5,000? 6,000?
Yeah, around that. I think like 4 to 5,000 years ago.
Okay. And then Akkadian is when?
There's some overlap, but it develops into a language like just after, like the rise. And Akkadian develops into like it has stages, and then you have like Babylonian, Proto-Babylonian, Persian, Old Persian, Elamite.
We don't have. There's no writing at all at Göbekli Tepe, correct? It's all just iconography.
Yeah, or at least that we figured out that looks like writing. Yeah, I'm really hoping to go back to Tepe.
What's your take on this whole reluctance to further excavate, and how they have such a small amount of the site? It's only 5% that's been uncovered, but through LiDAR, they're aware there's a bunch more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an archaeologist. I have friends who are archaeologists, and I think archaeology is tricky because so much of archaeology is dependent on governments and institutions and funding that getting mad at archaeologists for not excavating is kind of like getting mad at construction workers for not fixing your potholes.
Right.
Where it's like, like they're kind of doing the last stage. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly incentive by the Turkish government to want to capitalize on that being a tourist destination. And you really need to safeguard archaeological excavations because otherwise it's being compromised,
right?
And like pillaging and stuff like that. It happens. I mean, when I was in Egypt 2 summers ago, and you go to the Valley of the Kings, they've got security cameras up everywhere because there are tombs there that we still haven't discovered. And so they're like, we don't want people digging around in here looking for.
Well, they've lost so much over history.
Oh, we've only discovered 1% of ancient Egypt.
That's so nuts.
1%. Isn't that crazy?
That is the nuttiest part of all of history is Egypt to me. I still have not been.
You gotta go.
I know. I almost went in December. I just couldn't find the time. I'm just too damn busy. I will though. I definitely will. But it is to me the nuttiest time in history because good luck explaining the Great Pyramid. Good luck.
And it's such a big time frame. Like there's
Yeah.
1,000 years between the pyramids being built and Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings.
Yeah.
1,000 years.
Yeah. Nuts.
It's so crazy. Egypt is one of the wildest places you'll ever be.
Well, it just doesn't make sense. It's like, how? What were you guys using? What were you doing? How'd you do it? How'd you measure it? How'd you figure it out?
Yeah. You've been to Greece, right?
Yes.
Have you been to Jordan?
No.
Oh, you got to go see Petra.
Yeah.
Petra's phenomenal.
Greece rather was fantastic.
They're all crazy.
God, it's just like when you're just there in the presence of these things and just trying to put your brain back thousands of years and imagine what society was like back then.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Egypt was crazy because Egypt is like Greece in that you have like, you can go to the Pantheon and you see that kind of stuff, right? But you go to Egypt and there's 4,000-year-old paint on them. You're like, what? I can't get paint to stay on my wall for 10 years. Like, and it's almost exclusively because of the climate, and it got buried in sand. But it's so wild. So wild.
When you say that 1% of ancient Egypt has been discovered, what do you really mean by that?
Of the percentage of what we know that happened in Egyptian history, 1% has been excavated in terms of what we can actually pull out of the ground and look at artifacts. So there's whole eras of pharaohs that we don't know where they're buried. Like even when Tutankhamun was discovered, he was kind of a footnote in the pharaohs that we knew about at that time. And we didn't know he was, as extravagant, as rich, as, until we discovered his actual tomb. A lot of people at that time didn't even think he was worth looking into, because we have these lists of pharaohs, and the thing with the pharaohs is that the next pharaoh is always trying to prove that he's the better one. And this is why you go to Egypt and you find statues of Ramses everywhere. And part of it was because Ramses, I think it was Ramses II, he commissioned so many statues of himself. Because he's like, oh, I'm the best, I'm the greatest. And what they couldn't keep up with the commissioning, and they started actually rubbing off the names of previous pharaohs on statues and just putting Ramses on it.
Really?
Because
Wow.
he was just, so you go like, from the top of Egypt to the bottom of Egypt, and you're going to find statues of Ramses.
He wanted to leave his mark.
He wanted to leave, and he did, right? Like, it worked.
We're talking about it now in
I know.
2024.
I know.
Yeah, that is nuts. So when you go there and you're in the presence of these things and you try to put yourself back into that time period, like, have you ever tried to think, like, what was the motivation to make something as great as the Pyramid of Giza, the Great Pyramid?
People definitely want to make their mark, right?
Right, but that's a mark that just doesn't even make sense.
There's something to that. I mean, if you think you're a god,
Right.
and you have this whole kind of worldview perspective and theology that you need to make something that and bury yourself with all this crap because that's going to make a difference in your afterlife, then you're going to go big rather than going home, right? So the perceptions of people in the ancient world are just so different. We got it so good right now.
Oh, yeah.
Like longevity, health, food is just on a completely different scale. And so the conventions of needing to make sure that, especially if you're like the richest guy around, that you tick off all the boxes, because you're going to die, and you're probably going to die sooner than you want to, sooner rather than later. And you have this whole perception of, well, if I bury myself with all this stuff and maybe even some of the people, we're just going to kill them and include them too, because they're going to help me out. That's going to help me out in the afterlife.
You need slaves in the afterlife if you're a pharaoh.
Yeah, of course you do.
You can't just
Why
go
not?
by yourself.
Right? Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So Khufu's pyramid, what's the timeline that he was even in power?
I don't know. I'm not an Egyptologist or an archaeologist necessarily, but he was. I think that was like 4,000 years ago. We only really have a tiny little statue of him.
That's
We don't
nuts.
actually have that much about him.
I guess he was busy making a pyramid.
So they say, right?
So they say.
Billy thinks different, but
Oh, a lot of people think different. That's what's interesting about it is the archaeological argument that like Dr. Robert Schoch makes about the water erosion in the Temple of the Sphinx.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating argument because it does appear like that's water erosion. And that would put the timeline way, way back.
Yeah, I think even just looking at the Sphinx, you can tell that no matter what your perspective is, you should entertain the idea, at minimum, that the head was built later.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it doesn't fit the body.
It has much less erosion. But you could also attribute that to the different densities of the stone. Like, that's one of the things about these layers of limestone. It's like some of them are much more porous and some they erode easier.
Yeah.
You do see that,
Yeah.
you know, and I think they're doing a terrible disservice by covering the Sphinx with like new stones, and you know they redid the paws and they're doing all that. Like, my God, people, like, leave it alone. Like, leave it the way it is.
Yeah, it's this tricky balance between.
Restoration and recreation.
Yeah.
Because they're in a recreation stage.
Yeah.
And it was obviously they're doing it with smaller stones, and it like looks different. It's not the same thing. It's not what it initially was. It was carved from one piece of stone.
Have you seen some of the restoration stuff that Saddam Hussein did
No.
in Iraq?
No.
Jamie, you got to pull up the ziggurat at Ur.
Oh no.
So, Saddam Hussein was a bit of a nut job, but he believed, as far as I understand it, that he was the recreation of Nebuchadnezzar.
Oh.
So he did all of this restorative work in Iraq on things like the walls of Babylon, and in Ur, he rebuilt the ziggurat. So if you look at that picture over there that says 1932 and 2022, that's what he did. Is he basically tried to rebuild this entire thing. Wow. And it's amazing. I am trying hard to get to Iraq because I wanna see this thing. Interestingly
Don't
enough,
die.
yeah.
Don't die, dude. Don't go over there.
So that's actually Ur.
That's so. I'm sorry, but that.
Yeah.
So this is the modern version with the small bricks. The original version, was it all carved from one piece?
No, it would have been clay bricks.
So these were clay bricks. So what do we? Jamie? Can you go back to the 1930 image, please, so we could see what it looked like? God, I would rather just have that. You know, I mean, I want to see what it looked like and what it looks like all these years later. I don't want to see a recreation, which is very similar to what they've done to the Sphinx.
Yeah, the Sphinx. Even when I was in Egypt, they were doing some work in like.
Can you, Jamie? Can you go to the rehabilitation of the Sphinx or whatever they were called?
Yeah, I just clicked on like the ruins of it. It was gonna
Yeah.
go back to the 30s.
Well, the restoration part is the interesting part. Like, you can see the restoration. If you go to just Google restoration of the Sphinx paws.
Well, they're talking about putting encasing stones on the pyramid.
Yeah, I've heard that too. God, don't do that.
I don't think they should do that either.
No, you shouldn't do anything. I mean, obviously they took the original casing stones off, but that's also history. So
Yeah.
now you can see like the new paws. Well, that seems like the difference between buried and unburied.
Yeah.
So like even when Napoleon came upon, like right there, like isn't that restored?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there was much more erosion then. When Napoleon came upon it, it was buried, right?
I think so.
Yeah,
I
so,
think that was the case.
Like over time, because you're dealing with these crazy sandstorms, over time everything gets kind of buried.
Oh, so much of it is under sand for so long. Like the temple of the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut was mostly under sand for a long, long time.
Wow.
Before they like uncovered it. And fortunately, like the aridness of Egypt preserves things like crazy.
Yeah, see, that's what the paws look like
Right.
now. That's a disaster.
Yeah.
That's so gross. When you know, if you do take that timeline, the Robert Schoch timeline, and you say, okay, so you're talking about thousands of years of rainfall. You have to go back to when there was rainfall in the Nile Valley. So now you're back like 9,000 years. Like, one of the more interesting things about hieroglyphs and the interpretations of it is that the ancient hieroglyphs, the ancient versions of pharaohs, rather, like when they go back, you know, past the established dates of 2500 BC and before that, you get to like 30,000 years ago, and then they say that these are myth. And that this is not representative of an actual history. This is some sort of a mythical history.
Yeah, numbers are tricky in ancient languages because it's not entirely clear whether numbers are meant to be representational. Or,
Is that like why they said that Noah lived 600 years old?
yeah, that's
That kind of
that's
thing?
part of it. I mean, you have that, and you have the Sumerian king lists, which have people living hundreds and thousands of years too. And I mean, there are some interesting academic articles on like the probability of the numbers that come up in those, because we have a base 10 counting system because we count our fingers. Ancient Near Eastern cultures like the Babylonians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, they had a base 12 counting system because they would count each hinge, or whatever you call these, like spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
The different joints of the finger.
Yeah, the joints. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have 360 degrees in a circle, 365 days in a year. Like this comes from the Mesopotamian counting conventions. And you look at some of these lists and they're operational and all divisible by like 12 and 60. And you're like, what's going on here? So not all of them, but enough of them where it's statistically impossible. And I don't totally know what to make of those things, because you do have the genealogies, I believe it's Genesis chapter 4 and Genesis chapter 11, where they're all divisible by these types of numbers that were very common in the ancient Near East. They're not random. Whereas if you look at the genealogies later in like Chronicles and Kings of the ages of the Israelite kings, they're random. And so it's just like, what do we do with that?
Right.
Because numbers are also far more representational, which is why we see numbers like 12 and 40 and 7 come up in the Bible, but also other ancient Near Eastern literature. Like there's certain numbers in Egyptian society that also were seen as like perfect numbers, or like numbers that you wanted to incorporate. So
what's the earliest interpretation of calendars? Like what is the earliest where they did decide what a year was?
I have no idea.
Because you got to imagine, if you're, the average lifespan wasn't so good back then.
Yeah.
A lot of people got infected, died of war, famine, all these things. It would take quite a long time for people to figure out what a year was.
Right.
If you have we're going thousands and thousands of years ago. We have to establish, like, okay, a day is, let's put the stick in the ground. When the shadow is here, this is where we start.
Yeah.
When the shadow goes all the way around like that, okay, well, maybe we can like mark these off. Okay, now we've got a sundial.
And there are different timekeeping conventions depending on society. Like ancient Jews had a different timekeeping convention than ancient Romans. And so that's why you see, like in Genesis chapter 1, it talks about there being evening and there being morning, is because, well, Jews today, right? You start the Sabbath on sundown the day before, right? So that's why. It's because there's different cycles, and so we go on a 24-hour time system. But ancient Jews had a different convention of that. Ancient Romans had a different convention of that. Ancient Mesopotamian cultures had their own kind of conventions about these things, and calendars were all over the place. When you get to the Julian calendar, you gotta have to standardize this thing, because everybody's operating on a different, the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar. Ancient timekeeping is very inexact and very messy, and so you kind of got to take certain things with a grain of salt,
right?
In terms of that, but yeah, ancient calendars. I don't even know. I know that talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, the group in Qumran, who were they were a sectarian group of Jews who believed that the Jews in Jerusalem had basically capitulated and were not holy enough. And part of their reasoning is that they believe they have a perfect calendar. And so they use a different calendar that doesn't have to do things like incorporate an extra month every certain number of years, because, their thing is not perfect. And part of their reasoning as to why they're like the chosen is that they have a timekeeping system that they say is perfect.
Many cultures used a 13-month calendar, right? Like, what was the logic behind that? Does that work?
I don't know.
The idea was 13 months, 28 days each month, and you wouldn't have to have leap years and all that shit.
Yeah.
Archaeologists, okay, there it is. World oldest calendar, 12,000 years old.
Yeah, that's wild.
So it is on Göbekli Tepe. Oh, the ancient carvings of the sun, moon, and various constellations sits on a pillar. Göbekli Tepe, 12,000 years old. Researchers believe that ancient people used a so-called lunisolar calendar to mark the changing of the seasons.
Right.
Interesting. So it was at least representative of the fact that we know when the days start getting shorter, it starts getting colder, and then and then it warms up again. The days start getting longer.
This is why solstices are so key in like most of human history.
Right.
It's because you got to figure out like what's a marker point.
Right. Which is one of the things that's so fascinating about some of the constructions of the pyramid, where on the summer solstice, these pillars line up so perfectly that the light shines straight down these hallways and illuminates everything. It's like,
Right.
how did you guys nail that?
Yeah, I mean, just because they're ancient doesn't mean they're stupid.
Well, they're
right?
just brilliant.
Yeah.
They weren't just stupid. They were fucking brilliant. That's what, I mean, they weren't just ancient. It's just so weird that people were so vastly more intelligent, at least in terms of their ability to build things, than anyone else, anywhere around them. That's what's so weird about Egypt to me. It's like there's amazing pieces of, like, even ancient Greece is incredible, but I can kind of believe you did it. You know,
Right.
when you deal with 2,300,000 stones in the Great Pyramid, and some of them 50 tons, 60 tons.
That's pretty
from
crazy.
500 miles away. Like,
Yeah.
what did you do? How the hell did you do it?
I mean, there have been a lot of things that have been lost. We still, as far as I'm aware, don't know how the Romans made their concrete. That Roman concrete is like this thing that survives. They were able to make domes out of it.
Well, you know about Terra Preta in the Amazon. Do you know about that?
No.
Oh,
what's
Terra
that?
Preta is their particular rich soil that is man-made soil.
Oh, yes, I did know. I
That's
do
a
know about that.
Combination of charcoal and bacteria, and
Yeah.
it's incredible.
Yeah.
And it's unbelievably fertile in terms of your ability to grow food on it. And they made it, and we don't know how they did it.
Yeah.
And it's man-made stuff,
Yeah.
which is so bananas. It's like a giant chunk of this stuff that is all over the Amazon was made by people specifically to encourage the growth of plants.
I mean, this is why history gets me so excited.
Oh, it's so amazing, and it's so interesting too. I was watching something on YouTube yesterday about the Mayan culture and the Aztecs. It was I went on a deep dive when I started getting into getting ready for this. But when you think about how many people existed back then, and then Europeans come and everybody dies. Everybody dies of disease. And it's like, how many people died? Like millions? Millions of people died here? Millions of people died there? Like, holy shit. And you go through like the story of the collapse of the Mayan civilization, the collapse of the Aztec civilization, like the accounts that these priests had of visiting these Aztec markets and how incredible they were. These people from Rome who'd come to visit the Mayans, they're like, this is unbelievable, or the Aztecs rather. Like, this is unbelievable how sophisticated they are. And then
Gone.
everybody's dead.
Dunzo.
Just you just gotta go, wow. How many times has this happened in history?
Yeah.
Where people have visited places and brought their cooties and killed off a giant swath of the population. And one of the things that they're discovering now in the Amazon, which is so fascinating, is through use of LiDAR. You know, they're discovering, like, oh my God, this is like all populated.
Yeah.
This whole thing was populated.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
The ground penetrating radar stuff.
And the trees and all the rainforest is mostly from man-made agriculture.
Yeah, that's wild.
Nuts.
Wild.
And this is all recent
Yeah.
that they're figuring this out.
Yeah.
Which is also so fascinating about history, is that it is a constant and never-ending search.
Yeah.
And that even today, with as much information as we have, you can pick up your phone and ask them, you know, when was Nero born? It'll tell you, like, instantaneously. We still don't have answers to a lot of really fascinating questions, like the Olmecs or all these other civilizations. Like, who, where did they come from? Why do they look like this?
Yeah.
Why'd they make these big stone heads, you know? Or Stonehenge, it's another one. Like, Jesus, what is this?
Yeah.
There's so many versions of that all over the world, and the search for our origins is one of the most human endeavors. One of the most, because to know that we are particularly unique. We're so different. We stand out from every other animal on this planet. And there's this crazy, wild war of biology where life is just eating life all around us. And we just got to some crazy place that far beyond any other creature that's on this planet.
Yeah.
And we did it in a bunch of different ways. We did it in a bunch of different ways all over the place with different scribbles and different icons and different gods and different things. And we're all wondering, like, which one, where did it start? What was the origin of all this? Like, what was the need to write these things down? What purpose did it serve to have these myths and legends and stories? Like, was it just to keep society together, or was it to retell a very important story that was a very unique thing that happened at the dawn of time?
And that's why you see, I mean, the literary comparison of ancient Near Eastern origin stories is like a really interesting thing to do, because when you look at something like the Enuma Elish, which was the Babylonian creation story, and then you look at something like Genesis chapter 1, there are obvious crossovers with, like I said before, these ancient Near Eastern conventions. But then you can see that the author of Genesis is making these points that are actually rebutting something like the origin stories of the surrounding cultures that largely believe that matter is like eternal and the gods come out of the created world, and that there's this narrative of the battle that takes place where some gods fight against other gods, and the world around us that we see and like human beings are the end result of this battle. And so they would read this on every Babylonian New Year, and one of the main themes was basically that, like, it's all chance, it's all a random mistake. You were created without purpose and intention because Tiamat gets destroyed, and she's the god that you come from. And then you read Genesis chapter 1, and it says, in the beginning God creates the heavens and the earth, and he makes it good. And there's this idea that, like, that's countercultural in the idea that the Babylonians did not think that the world was good. And that, like, at the end of every refrain, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, and then it's very good at the end. And that humanity in particular is created in the image of God. Like, that's a very, not just like kings, which a lot of ancient Near Eastern cultures believed that kings were created in the image of God, but that humanity in general is created in the image of God. And this idea of the Imago Dei, that that's why you're different. Like, why are you different from all the animals? Because you're given something that exemplifies a unique quality. And then the ancient Near Eastern cultures that believe that, the planets are gods, and that the sea is a god, and Genesis chapter 1 looks at that, and it kind of subverts the expectations of the day in getting to this ultimate question of, well, why are we here? What are we supposed to do while we're here, and how do we get out of here? And it says that, no, there's purpose, there's meaning, there's intention, and actually a lot of the things that you worship, it's pretty stupid because God created them.
What is the original origin story, or the earliest, I should say, origin story
of
humanity?
I don't know.
Would it be the Mesopotamians? Would it be the Sumerians? Like, who had the one that's the oldest?
I mean, the Enuma Elish is pretty old. There are a number of different, like, variations. The problem is that we're largely relying on, like, our complete copies are coming in languages like Akkadian, where the ones in Sumerian are very fragmentary. So, like, even the Epic of Gilgamesh, the copy that we have that kind of is the final, if you go and you read a translation of the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's going to be the one in Akkadian from the library of Ashurbanipal. But the earlier versions in Sumerian don't even have the flood story in it. And yeah, so and they're more pieced together. And we actually do have another flood story in the Atrahasis, which appears to have been influenced, the Epic of Gilgamesh story is influenced by the Atrahasis. But I, in terms of, like, written language, I guess it's the Enuma Elish. I don't actually know what, like, the oldest one is. But you get a lot of these origin stories, and they have these themes. We see it in the Bible too. The ancient Near Eastern cultures were very preoccupied with chaos and order. And so it's all about kind of creating order out of the chaos of the world. And that's where I think you do see the parallels.
Well, that's the establishment of society, right?
Yeah, and establishing chaos and certain things being representational of chaos within the created order, the Bible included, but a lot of other ancient cultures saw things like the ocean as the embodiment of unpredictability and chaos. And so that's why you have sea monsters are this very common depiction. The Leviathan in Job, which is this, sea monster. And it's representational in a way of, because it appears actually in Babylonian literature too, the Leviathan.
Really?
Yeah, and it's encompassing chaos in the world. And the point of God bringing it up to Job in the book of Job is like, God has the ability to tame this thing. And even in the book of Revelation, at the end of the Bible, it says that in the new heavens and new earth, there will be no sea. And it's not because, I had a friend who is Australian, and we were kind of working through translating sections of Revelation. And he's like, hold on, there will be no sea. It's like, I'm Australian, I love the sea. And, but the point of that, though, is not necessarily that, like, the body of water is not going to exist. It's that the ocean, the sea, is so unpredictable. You go out there and storms, can come out of nowhere and you die.
Right.
And so there are these like motifs that are representational in the ancient world, and we see a lot of those in these creation stories.
So would it be that the dangers of the sea would no longer exist?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the sea kind of working as an analogy of that which is unpredictable. And actually, there's a lot of concepts of the realm of the dead being in the sea that we see throughout this literature. If you read the book of Jonah, there's this kind of stylistic, which you miss when you read it in the English, but it's very apparent in the Hebrew, where Noah keeps going down. He goes down from his town to the dock, and then he goes down into the boat, and then he goes down into, the inside of the boat, and then the storm happens, and then they throw him overboard down into the sea and down into the fish, and the fish takes him down into the depths of the sea. And when Jonah prays, he says, I cry out from the depths of Sheol, which is the realm of the dead. So there is actually a form of Jewish interpretation where it argues that Jonah actually died and was resurrected when he was spit up by the fish. And it could be because in the Gospels, Jesus says, all the people are following him and they keep asking him for miracles. Because they're like, we saw you do miracles. Do more miracles for us. Come on, do a trick.
Right.
And Jesus says, the only miracle you're going to get is the sign of Jonah. That just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, I will be in the belly of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. Prediction of his own death and resurrection. But there is an argument within rabbinical literature that when Jonah says that he's crying out from the depths of Sheol, it's because he's actually dead. And that's one interpretation. But another interpretation could just be that he saw and understood, as a person of his day, the depths of the ocean as where the dead people ended up anyways. Like your soul goes down into the chaos and the disorder of Sheol, which is the realm of the dead.
Is that where they disposed of bodies?
In the ocean?
Yeah.
No.
Vikings did, right? Didn't they light boats on fire and push them out there?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't a common practice amongst other civilizations.
Not that I know of. I mean, Jews would definitely, really ancient Jewish conventions of burial, you would just bury someone in the earth. And then by the time you get to Jesus' day, you had like family tombs and stuff.
Well, there was an ancient hominid that's not human, and one of the things that they were so fascinated about was that they buried their dead. And that they did so in a cave. Do you remember that, Jamie? Do you remember who was discussing that with us? It was, they did not think that this version of ancient primate was capable of these things. And then they seemed to have confirmation through these very extensive cave systems that there was at least one area where they would put their dead.
Yeah.
And it was a difficult path to get to this, too. This is a very small hominid, and I think people have tried to make their way through it, and it's really hard. Like, some of these caves, you're, basically crawling on your stomach, which is fucking terrifying. Because people have died that way.
Are you claustrophobic?
No, I'm not claustrophobic. Normal
You just don't want to crawl in a
I don't
cave?
want to crawl in the middle of the earth into something that's 11 inches high.
Yeah.
They're, squirming slowly. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Their body barely fits in there. And the guy died recently. Brian Moran. Oh, it was Brian. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So they found that this ancient hominid which didn't really look like us.
Yeah.
Was burying their dead.
Yeah, I mean, burial conventions change over time. The ways that they're burying, like, in the ancient Israelite days are very different in the conventions than when you get to Jesus.
Karen, as archaeologists uncover evidence of intentional burial cave engravings by early human ancestor. What did that sucker look like? So the Denaldi chamber, what is the type of Homo naledi, right? Homo naledi. Google that, see what they look like. Homo naledi. What we think they look like, right? Whoa, that's crazy. That's crazy. So as a Christian, what do you think about all this stuff? Like, what do you think about ancient hominids, Australopithecus, Neanderthals? Like, what was God up to with all this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I got to stay in my lane. I ultimately would be an advocate for intelligent design, where I would say that that God purposefully created humanity in a way. You had Stephen Meyer on, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, he's one of those guys who talks about kind of the issues that he sees with evolution. And I think I have some of those issues too. My friend Jonathan McClatchy is a biologist, and he does some really great presentations on the ways that he sees kind of the intricacies of Neo-Darwinian evolution is not quite explaining some of what's going on with things like the fossil record and some of the gaps that we have in there. When you talk about early hominids, I mean, ultimately, I think that there are aspects of the fact that there are ancient cultures which, I mean, humanity obviously looks very different today than it did, if we're going tens of thousands of years ago.
Right.
And so I think that there's a different kind of convention in understanding. But ultimately, I would ascribe to there being an original Adam and Eve, and that those are our, like, if you want to call them like our first parents kind of thing. But there are other Christians who I would disagree with, but I think have interesting articulations of that in terms of theistic evolution. I disagree with them, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility to find explanations. I don't think the Bible is trying to explain how people came into existence in the same way that maybe we want it to. And a lot of people read the origin stories in Genesis as a scientific textbook. And I think ultimately that misses the point of what Genesis is trying to say. This goes back to what we were talking about with, like, how did the original audience understood this?
Right.
When they read Genesis chapter 1, are they looking at that as an exact prescription of what God did? I mean, in some ways, maybe, but in other ways, they could see that as this, like, counter-apologetic to the other ancient Near Eastern stories, like I explained. So I just think we need to be careful when we're looking at, or even like counting up the genealogies and coming up with how old the Earth is. I think that might be missing the forest for the trees in what we're actually looking at when we look at ancient documents and how we're trying to interpret them. But it is a big question, right?
Well, the question of evolution is a fascinating one, right? Because there's obviously something happening, particularly with us, if we really are related to Homo naledi, or Neanderthal. There's something clearly is happening. This is like a process of change. And if we don't completely understand all the factors in that process of change, we might miss out. The equation might be incomplete. It's like we know a lot now about evolution that we did not know before, but like all sciences, new data comes in and you have to recalibrate things. Like, have you been paying attention to this? There's a new discussion about dark matter and dark energy. The new discussion is that it might not be a correct theory, and that what it might be is that time moves differently in the voids between galaxies. And this is a new theory. And, like, new enough and discussed enough among people that really understand it that it's getting to me. Right, so I'm reading it. So see if you can find that. It's a very complex and nuanced conversation, but most of the universe is dark energy. It's a giant percentage of the universe is dark energy and dark matter, and we don't really know what that stuff is. And so this is proposing that there's an additional possible theory that might explain it better.
I mean, that area of science is crazy.
Nuts.
Crazy.
And then you have the James Webb Telescope that's giving us even more data than ever before, and and you have to look at all of it and go, wait, why are those things here? How are they there so long ago? Like, what are these red things at the beginning of time? Like, what the fuck is all
The universe is bonkers.
nuts?
Yeah, and I mean, I think we get that in history too, whereas we have these kind of what we think are established conventions, and then all of a sudden we discover
Right.
something and it like completely overthrows the ideas that we have.
Like
so-
Clovis first.
yeah, or go back to Tepe.
Yeah.
Or actually, good segue.
That's the best one, right?
So yeah, I made one. I made something for you.
Ooh. So,
I make papyri facsimiles. Oh, my description is a little bit wonky here. I'll fix that. So you were talking about like what is our oldest manuscript evidence? So this guy is P52, John Rylands 457. So that's a genuine Egyptian papyri that I made. I cut it out for you, and then I transcribed the text on that manuscript. So when we're talking about what is potentially our oldest evidence for the New Testament, this manuscript that most likely comes from Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, is the one that usually is universally accepted as our oldest one. And that contains John 18, where Jesus is on trial before Pilate. And yeah, so that's the one. It's in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, England.
so this is a copy of that exactly? This is exactly what it looks like?
Yeah, so I cut that out on the papyri with a scalpel, and then I transcribed the text on.
You did a good job, dude.
And
This is, you nerded out.
I know I'm
For real nerded
listen,
out. This is a real nerding out of.
So that's actually so that's someone else's facsimile, which is not as good as the one I made.
It's
you.
not as good. Yours is better.
And where Jesus is on trial before Pilate, and Jesus says, "Everyone who follows the truth, who is following the truth, follows me." And on the back has the words of Pilate saying, "What is truth?" But so part of my research, so the reason I bring this up is because before this was discovered by C.H. Roberts in the 1940s, the convention was, because of a guy named C.H. Bauer, that the Gospel of John was 2nd century. And so he was a student of Hegel. Have you ever heard of Hegelian dialectic? So you have like a thesis, synthesis, and antithesis.
Yes.
So Hegel had this philosophical theory, and his student Bauer takes that and he incorporates this into history, and he says, the earliest gospel, Mark, has this very Jewish Jesus, and then the later gospels have a very like the last of what I call the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Luke has a very kind of more divine Jesus, and so he says, based on this, John is the last written one, and it combines these two where you get a very human and a very divine Jesus together. And so based on this, he says that John has to be 2nd century. Well, we discover this guy. C.H. Roberts is, literally going through these piles of manuscripts in these drawers that are being like stashed away, and he finds this guy, and he sees that it's written on both sides, which is almost exclusively a Christian convention, because in the ancient world they used scrolls. And the Christians, for reasons we're not entirely clear on, they start to make codices, books. And so they write on both sides. And so he says, okay, this is written on both sides. It's probably a Christian manuscript. So he sends it off to the leading paleographers, or guys who date manuscripts. And they all say, this is the beginning of the 2nd century. And so there's still debate about the dating of this, but the unanimous consensus is that it's comfortably 2nd century, potentially the beginning of the 2nd century, which means that this is found in Egypt. John is probably writing his gospel in Ephesus, so it has to be written by John, spread around, find its way to Egypt, be copied, and then end up in this manuscript, which means that at minimum, you've already pushed the Gospel of John back into the 1st century comfortably, and potentially even, like, most likely into the lifetime of the eyewitnesses of these events. And so all of the literature up until that point from the scholarly consensus about the dating of the Gospel of John gets totally rewritten. Wow. And it's because of that guy. And because of my academic work, where I was telling you, like, in paratextual features, when we look at these tiny manuscripts and you figure out, okay, well, what does that look like on the page? I also made you So this is, I used 2 different variations of papyri. So you have there where P52 would have been on the page, and based on it's called codicological conventions, the spacings of the words, and the way that the size of the margin that we can see, where it would have been on the page and how big the page would have actually been. So this is like a reconstruction, and then I filled in the rest of the text in the same sort of stylistic hand of the scribes at that time, what that page would have looked like. So this would have come from, would have been essentially like a pocket copy of the Gospel of John.
Wow. That's unbelievable. Wow. That's so fascinating.
So this is the kind of work that I do in terms of trying to figure out, okay, you have these fragments. How big would this codex actually been? How big would have the document been? And then you compare and you contrast them to, say, like non-Christian literature, like Thucydides or Tacitus or Pliny or Cicero or Cassiodoro, those kind of guys, and look at the differences between how these documents would have been put together and written in their day.
God, it's so beautiful. It's just so bizarre to imagine these people writing this stuff down so long ago.
You know what's wild is when you actually get the chance, which I have a number of times, to actually handle the original documents.
Oh my God.
And
wear rubber gloves?
No, you know why? Is that we used to do that, but actually the oils in your hands are more abrasive than latex or even cloth. So
the oils are more abrasive?
No, sorry, I said that wrong. They're less abrasive.
Okay.
So it used to be that you always had to handle things with, gloves, and nowadays we don't do that anymore.
Ooh, that's
so,
wild.
And
so you're touching it with your actual fingers. That's gotta feel bizarre.
I was at the 2 summers ago. I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and I was looking at a manuscript called P1 or P-Oxy 2, 1.2, and it's a beginning of the 3rd century copy of the first page of Matthew's Gospel. And when I requested access to it, they told me that the last person to request it was when Pope John Paul II came and visited the States, and they pulled it out for him. So on the, in the library when you used to have to punch your name, write your name on the cards.
Yeah.
If there was a card, that guy. So I made a facsimile of that one too, and that one is that's the genealogy of Jesus from Matthew's Gospel. Actually, you know what, Jamie? If you go up to the search bar and put CSNTM, those letters, csntm.org. So this is the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. So if you click Digital Manuscript Collection, so they go around the world and they try to digitize all the existing New Testament manuscripts to preserve them. And so you can actually, you see there on the side, you can click, I want to look at a papyri, and you can go the different conventions of, the date or the time.
And so you could read the translation and then go and look at the original source of it.
Yeah, so ideally you always want to go look at the original, but because of organizations like CSNTM, which is actually in Dallas, people like me don't have to go to Europe where a lot of these manuscripts are housed. We can look at them, and because these are such high grade, that you can figure these